Hello, little listeners, and welcome to the character profile of Fred, Handel, Elliot. I'm Michael.
I'm Gemma.
She's not northern. I think I've lost my northernness. We are going to be spending the next hour or so chatting about the legend, the absolute Corrie icon that was Fred Elliott. Now, this is something we've been meaning to do for a long time. Back in the early days of the podcast, the character profiles were so short because we squeezed them into the normal episodes, didn't we? We had like 10, 20 minutes tops to chat about the characters, and some real greats have been sadly just rushed over, so we've been meaning to go back and redo some of them, and sadly the recent news of John Svident's passing back a couple of weeks ago made us think, well, why not now? So yeah, we are going to be talking about the absolute legend that is Fred Elliott, who, and I'm not just saying it because I'm caught up in the moment, honestly is he's up there for me. He's got to be in possibly my top 10 Coronation Street characters of all time. He brought so much to the show in terms of comedy, pathos, that I love the romantic side of him. He was such a well-rounded character, and I'm not just talking about his portly stature. He's just fab, isn't he?
Very iconic, played by John Svident, as you said, who arrived in the UK aged 3. He grew up on Guernsey. He spoke French patois.
Yes, he's got a really interesting backstory.
Do you think that helped him with his accent? I mean, spoiler alert, if you've ever heard John Svident in real life, you'll know that his Fred Elliott voice is not at all like his normal speaking voice.
It's so funny, isn't it? Like the first time you hear an actor speak in their normal voice for Coronation Street, so often it throws you off guard. Even like, Charlotte Jordan now doesn't sound like Daisy does. And then you got, Sue Nichols is a lot flummier in real life. But I think John Svident, he is the top. He is, the most RP of them all, isn't he? And he had it all could have been very, very different. Like you say, he grew up speaking French on Guernsey in the Channel Islands, and it's like his family were they escaped the Channel Islands from the Nazis, and then moved to Ashton-under-Lyne, which is we've been there. That's where that's near where the Richard Hillman's Canal is, isn't it? I think.
Yeah.
To the east of to the west of.
I don't know.
Well, east of Manchester.
Me on geography?
I'm not testing.
He left grammar school and he became a policeman. Can you believe that?
I think.
Can you imagine being arrested by somebody who speaks the way John Svident does, or you just immediately say you did it?
You're nicked, mate.
Hold your hands up, yeah. Right.
But did you put on a policeman voice, mate? So you wonder. I think
maybe he did.
When he was only a policeman for 6 years or so, he got stabbed, and maybe that's enough.
6 years is quite a long time to be anything.
I guess so, but I can imagine that. Seeing his imposing figure, plodding down the street. But
I don't know what he looked like.
Things were different back in when would this been? The 1950s or so.
Policemen were generally a bit more upper crust. Well, everyone was more upper crust back in the day. Nobody wore pyjamas to Tesco.
Oh no. So yeah, from Channel Island escapee to grammar school boy to policeman, but acting was his true passion that he found just a little bit later in life. He made his theatre.
Amdram, wasn't he?
He did do his Amdram, didn't he? His first turn on the stage, as far as I could tell, was playing the Sheriff of Nottingham in the Handley Christmas Panto in 1961, and. John Savident in Panto, absolutely perfect. Don't you think? It's all about the over-the-top drama and the stage presence and the big character, and I'd have loved to have seen him in anything like that.
He quit the force in 1961 after marrying Rona Hopkinson, and that is when he became an actor full-time. He had loads of roles on TV and film. Before he quit and became a full-time actor, he was in 8 O'Clock Walk in 1954. That was his first appearance. And then it took a few years for like a big notable kind of role to turn up for him. 1966, Red Cap. He obviously played Red Cap.
I don't know what that is. Go on. I was so surprised when I went to his IMDb page just how many productions he's got accredited. It lists 174 roles for him, and almost all of them came before Coronation Street. We'll talk a bit later about what he did after stepping down from the role of Fred Elliott, but he was just really seen to be the sort of actor that wanted to just make one-off appearances here and there. I don't think he wanted to get typecast, although I imagine probably what the most common type of character he played was the kind of the snobby ministerial buffoon.
Guy in charge.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, he did loads of great stuff. From productions that I've heard of, Avengers he was in, Dixon of Dock Green, the Battle of Britain film where he played opposite Laurence Olivier, don't you know, who was his idol growing up. He was in Yes Minister, he was in Doctor Who. I think he played, I think if I remember rightly, because we talked about this last year on the podcast, didn't we? He was like a Stuart or a Cavalier or something kind of character, which was perfect for him. And one of my favourites that we saw a few years back was that he was in the unaired pilot of Blackadder. The very first Blackadder series, if you seen that, it was set in medieval times, and he played the king, which was the role that later went to Brian Blessed. And those two,
It's like he made the role for Brian. He's like, Brian, do you want you take this because I'm going to do other things.
I'd love to have seen Brian Blessed and John Svident in like a shout off.
I know, who would win?
Just like who can raise the most decibels with their voice? I don't know. He was also in the early 90s in and I just discovered this the other day in a Mr. Bean sketch, which was also unaired. So you know the very first episode of Mr. Bean, there's the one where he's at the beach putting his swimming trunks on over his trousers, and there's also the great scene where he's in an exam, and I can't remember the actor who played the invigilator, but he's the guy that was on the Thimbley line and he went on to EastEnders afterwards. But he played. John Svident played the invigilator in the remake of that, and it's available on YouTube as well. He only got a few lines in there.
That's from 1991.
Yeah,
well,
that was
Michael,
perfect.
Getting any lines in a Mr. Bean sketch is quite the big deal.
Well, I think in the first episode of Mr. Bean, he actually spoke a little bit more, ever so slightly. But yeah, he was in that. He did Jeeves and Wooster.
He was in Clockwork Orange.
He was in A Clockwork Orange, which I've never seen, but I know that was lots of people didn't see that for a while, did they? Because it was banned. But yeah, he was in that. For me, one of the non-Coronation Street things that I remember seeing him in was Loch Ness, which is this, I think it had Ted Danson in it, I can't remember. It was released in 1996, so after he started in Coronation Street, but before he went full-time. And I don't remember a whole lot about his role. I don't know whether it was a big one or not.
Did he play Nessie?
He was not the Loch Ness monster.
Hello, take a photo, laugh longer.
Do you reckon he could? I bet he could have done a good Scottish accent.
Oh, probably. He can do all of the accents.
No, there was a bit where he had his kind of standard John Svident plummy accent in it, and there was a court scene. I think I haven't seen this in like 25 years or so. There was a bit where there was a court scene and they were trying to prove the existence of the Loch Ness monster, and there's a bit where John Svident says, "I'm waiting," and I vividly remember the moment that both me and my dad at the same time went, "I said I'm waiting." Honestly, it was great. Yeah, I've seen such a fraction of it, but I love the fact that he was just dipping in and out. He was a real actor's actor. He's spoken so many times. I've been looking over past interviews with him over the last few days, and the craft of acting, sort of really living your role, you're making every performance the best you can make it, trying out a bit of everything. That was so important for him. And yeah, but luckily he ended up settling on Fred, because can you imagine how different Coronation Street would be if that had only been like a little footnote in his IMDb page like everything else?
Maybe Brian Blessed would have taken on the role of Fred Elliott.
Do you reckon?
He's probably been chasing John Svident around like, why did you get all the roles? I wanted to be Fred Elliott. He could have done it.
He did a lot of theatre work back in the 60s, 70s, 80s as well. I think his first big production was in a show called Trelawney of the Wells. I don't know anything about that, but he also did Phantom of the Opera. He did I knew I wouldn't be able to pronounce this, Coriolanus, which was starring opposite Ian McKellen in 1984. He had his. He tried lots of things.
But he is most famous to us for playing Fred Elliott, who was in the show. He was born in 20-something October.
We're on to
1938.
Segueing nicely into actually about Fred Elliott now.
Died 9th of October 2006. His parents were William and Amelia Elliott. He had a sister called Beryl Peacock, and he was married to Sybil Elliott. Assume that she changed her name to Elliot. In 1959. Maureen Holdsworth, 1997, and Eve Sykes in 2001, but that was bigamous.
Didn't count, did it?
He had one child, but it's a secret. Ashley Peacock, 1976. He first appeared on the 26th of August, 1994. He last appeared on the 11th of October, 2006. That's right, he appeared after he died.
He was in an open casket. You don't get that very much, do you? Probably because they just couldn't close the coffin lid on him.
That's weird. And he appeared in 1,065 episodes.
Yes.
What do you remember him best for, Michael? I think we've mentioned that you might remember him for his booming voice and his catchphrases. It's good to have more than one.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with his catchphrases, sometimes it's mostly the repeating himself that people remember, and there's so many. I've seen all the tributes to John coming in over the last few weeks, and say, I'm sorry to see him gone. I say I'm sorry to see him gone, but he did have a few. Like, I always remember him saying, "Not in this world," if he was showing disbelief or something. And there was also like, he would say, "Now see," at the beginning of lots of sentences, and I found a little interview with him where he said, "Oh, this was based on a woman who lived near me when I was growing up in Ashton. She was a spinster who hated children, and whenever we walked past her garden, she would say, 'Now see, don't touch them roses.'"
I feel a kinship to her.
Yeah, the repeating. We were speaking about this. Was it last week on the podcast? Who did you say that he based it off? Do you remember?
Nope.
But
Al something?
Yeah, I don't remember what you said, but from what I could see from just doing a bit of reading around the internet over the past few days,
I think it's going to be one of these things where there's lots of different
versions,
inspirations that he's taken.
Al
Reed.
Okay.
His catchphrase was, "You'll be lucky," I say, "you'll be lucky," and his show ran from 1954 to 1966. So, I mean, it's very, very likely that he would know who this guy was, and he would have heard him say, "I see," but also that he probably, maybe Al Reed took it from this too.
Yeah, I mean, he said, John Svident has said it was also based on mill workers in Ashton. He said they used to shout and repeat themselves to be heard above the noise of the looms. When I first arrived on set all those years ago, I had no idea I'd stay so long. We filmed at a decent pace, and I'd often put in a few dialect phrases which caught on with the public, and people would tease me about them. People just took to Fred. I think it helped. There's lots of things that make a great and memorable character, but if you can, straight away quote one back at you, then you're onto a winner there. I think Charlie Lawson is still riding on the Jim McDonald impressions and quotes.
Having a catchphrase and having a prop or something like a physical piece of your wardrobe. I wouldn't say that Fred really was famous for that, although the straw hat for the butchers was quite...
Yeah.
I mean, he had a signature drink as well.
Scotch and Threat.
Yeah.
So that's whiskey. Is it with or without water?
I thought it was just a tiny bit of water, like a threat of water.
Yeah. I don't
really drink Scotch, I'm afraid.
It doesn't feel like Coronation Street characters these days have got tipples.
Peter loves orange juice.
Yeah, okay, but he's gone. It's like Mike had his large Scotch. He had his Scotch and Threat. So there was... he was just so layered and realistic a character. Some people might say, well, Fred was just a bit of a caricature.
He wasn't at all.
He wasn't. He felt so real. And the fact that he could do the comedy alongside all the drama, I mean, he was an utter hopeless romantic, and sometimes that was great for him, but more often than not, it led to devastating heartbreak. And there's been so many scenes over the year where he's there, in complete despair, bag in his mouth, and you were there, you could feel his utter grief about being dumped or taken advantage of or whatever of a woman again. He was what?
I was going to say, I mean, you're not really taking advantage of someone if you say, "I'm not going to marry you."
No, but you are if you say, I'm just come over from Thailand and I want to marry you.
Yeah,
please send £5,000 over to my sick uncle.
Yeah, so he was I think he's a very canny businessman, but he was unlucky in love, which I think, what an archetypal Coronation Street. If you're going to create a computer program to make Coronation Street characters, those would be one of the first things you'd put in as a character trait. But he wasn't a stereotype. He didn't really feel like a stereotype. Like you said, he was deeper than that.
Yeah, and it's funny looking back at some of the great Coronation Street characters, and so many of them were double acts with their significant other, weren't they? If you think of, Jack and Vera, Derek and Mavis, Bet and Alex, Hilda and Stan, exactly. And
Annie
Fred,
and Jack.
Fred never had that. He went through many... I mean, if it was anything, it would be Fred and Audrey, yet they never actually, they never got anywhere, even though that's where it started and that's where it ended. I suppose Fred's double act was with Ashley, if anything, but he was almost too big a character. He was able to fill the screen. Else. He doesn't need anyone else. He was so brilliant on his own. Going back to what you said about him being a canny businessman, usually his business endeavours were successful. It was funny seeing some of the less successful ones over the years, but it was... With Coronation Street, often the businessmen are, not the heroes, are they? They're as Coronation Street supposedly is a show to champion the working class, and the bosses are, the other side of the coin. Fred was to be honest, he's probably, character-wise, in universe, one of the wealthiest characters that Coronation Street has ever had.
He certainly had his fingers in a few very meaty pies.
Yeah, but he was also he was a devious businessman, and we'll talk as we go through his stories over the year about some of the times where he literally tried to hoodwink his neighbours and get one over on some of the people that he was nearest and dearest to, but despite all that, we still kind of loved him, and usually those tricks ended up with him falling flat on his face, and then because he was so good at...
Felt bad for him.
you felt bad for him.
Also, there's something really infectious about an unrelenting bon vivant like he was. He really liked being alive. Yeah. He liked women, he liked drink, he liked making money, he liked sausages, and he surrounded himself with all the things he liked, and he enjoyed himself while he was around. And there's something really addictive about somebody like that, somebody who just lives large.
He did. He lived life to the fullest, and as a viewer, you wanted to go along with him.
Yeah, like... If you're a kid who was a teenager in the 90s, you'd know that we were very into all that snowboarding, skating, all those extreme sports that we all enjoyed. No fear. That's how we lived our life. But he was a man of an older generation, and just having a drink and a woman at the end of the day, that was good enough. I think that's a good way to live your life, actually. Yeah, I've given up skateboarding now.
I saw somewhere about when he came in, he was a bit of a Reg Holdsworth replacement in a way, because a lot of what we've been saying about him being the canny, devious businessman,
true,
the larger than life personality, the bit kind of seedy he was, especially back in the beginning. Fred Elliott was a bit of a lech,
bit of a perv, yeah.
And he came in 1994. I can't remember
creature of his time.
I can't remember whether Reg Holdsworth... I think 95 was his last year, but it certainly he filled a gap. But he was... Reg Holdsworth, I would say, was a caricature of a character. Well, not that there's anything wrong with that in her cases. I still absolutely love Reg Holdsworth, but Fred is so much deeper on so many levels.
Oh yeah, definitely. But these are still both iconic characters, and there have been so many characters on Coronation Street, and some of them are very forgettable. But I think it really is a tribute to the actors themselves. Like, you could have played this guy as just a 2D, big, loudmouth lech, but Coronation Street and John Svident created something a bit more complicated than that. And that's why we all like soaps.
They struck absolute gold when they
Because you get to know these characters over decades. You get to see their highs and their lows. And you get to see that even somebody that seems quite cartoonish on the outside actually is a very complicated and deep person.
Because he was able to, literally, any lines that they would give him, he could... do it spot on. Yep. He was such a talented
gift. He was very charismatic.
Yeah, he absolutely
really was. I mean, in real life, this guy, I would never speak to this man. It might, I wouldn't have anything to say to him. I probably would find him weird. But on screen, he is so magnetic and interesting.
he was just warm.
Yeah.
Wasn't he, as a character? Eventually, they didn't
well,
quite know what
characters
to make him
off
at the start. But
strangely.
I think once they realised what they had with him and what, as an actor, he was capable of, they thought we can throw anything we got at him, and it worked every time.
Of Corrie throughout the decades is being able to recognise acting talent and working with an actor to create these very interesting characters. Because, I mean, John Svident, this is, a tribute to him. But also we need to recognise the skill and the talent of the writers and the storyliners and the producers now and in the past to take these talented people and give them a platform and write some really great scenarios and really great... I mean, you don't need to really write, I say over and over again for him, but you know what I mean. So,
I wonder how much of it was of those I says and repetitions were in the script, or whether he just did it.
I'd lived it. Right, so let's
You probably couldn't write for him without putting it in. He must have been such fun to write for, but also possibly a challenge. I don't know, because so much of his dialogue, like I was saying to you earlier, was almost poetry. The rich vocabulary, the figurative language, and the similes and everything. It was poetic is all I can think of to say. And I suppose in the hands of certain writers, that was probably quite intimidating, maybe, and think, is this going to sound right? But John, one of his many gifts was that he was able to just take something that would sound a little bit odd and probably looked at on the page and make it sound like, oh yeah, of course this is what Fred would say, because he's so full of himself and he's so loquacious, and he'd probably make a good podcast host, I have to say.
Well, he'd double everything up. Let's talk about...
don't give him Conversation Street. It'll be 6 hours long every week.
Fred Elliott, before he appeared in the show. So his backstory was, before 1994, he married Sybil, his first wife, in 1959, but she died of a heart attack in 1975. And then he got into a relationship with Catherine Guttridge, who is pregnant with his child. But when Ashley is born, Kathleen rejects him and says she wants to see the world. And Fred's like, I can't really raise this baby on my own. So he gives him to his sister and brother-in-law, Beryl and Sam Peacock. And that is why Ashley's called Ashley Peacock.
Yeah. So this is a bit like the Betty backstory in a way, isn't it? Apart from then that story, it was she who had the baby, but then passed it on to her sister to look after because she couldn't. There's not
really so many characters, so many stories like that these days, because it's not as common to be, for people to go, I'm totally unprepared for a child, because contraception's much better than it used to be.
Well, there's also a lot more support these days.
There's the shame of like being a single parent, or like the stigma against unwed mothers, etc., etc. It's not so good for soap stories. Now we just got to have affairs all the time.
Yeah, I know. So 1994 was Fred's first year on Coronation Street. Although I say year, he was only in 5 episodes, so it really was blink and you miss it. But he certainly caught the eye of the producers, and one of Fred's.
This was
if I think about what was Fred's most iconic stories, I couldn't say which ones they were, but this is certainly something that a lot of people like to remember, and it is his first hit on the show was this black pudding contest, which we watched on the DVDs, I think, a few years ago, didn't we?
Yeah, because, I mean, from a perspective of somebody that's always lived on the South Coast, going to France is not a big deal. Like, that's where you go on holiday. But being further up north, it's a bit more of an endeavour to go to France. So it's really weird to me that they've been to France on Coronation Street several times. They've never been to Ireland.
No.
Or Northern Ireland either, which is weird. Anyway, so he was introduced as this contestant. He's making black pudding. He has... obviously, they take it so very seriously in France too. So there's a big face-off between the French and the English British black puddings. And the first scene is in the Rovers when Alf and Audrey are bringing back, because they've done a tasting and they've selected him, haven't they? Mm-hmm.
He comes in, and it's almost like, although he's there's a few rough edges, the genesis of the character is there, and he's already quite fully formed. I think his first line is I think it might be to Tanya Pooley over the bar, and he's like, do you like a bit of blood sausage? the double entendres were dripping through his dialogue throughout those 12 years.
So it's a sort of a ambassadorial trip, isn't it? You've got Alf and Audrey as the the mayor of Weatherfield, going over in the limo, and he manages to talk his way into this as well. And he's talking about offal with Alf. He's perving after Audrey. He's offering to buy her French lingerie. And then when they have this big contest in Charleville, which is the twin city to...
Made up.
To Weatherfield. He tries to bribe a judge to make sure that the black pudding from Weatherfield wins, gets caught out, and Alf defends him and untwins the two towns. So, I mean, he's causing international
but just within his first few episodes.
Issues. You could tell from the beginning, bad at relationships, whether they're international or very personal.
And this cheating at the competition was very, very Fred. As we go through the years, we see where he's trying to... He just wants to win all the time, and he thinks that by giving a bit of a sly backhander, he can get whatever he wants. But this was, if you watch it, where you see the beginnings of his lust for Audrey, and it's so lechy and pervy. It's definitely got more of a touch of the Reg Holdsworth about him then.
Well, it kind of is sweet in a way, or is it not? Is it creepy? I don't know. You decide what you think, but that he came into the show pursuing Audrey, and how he ended up his run on Coronation Street. Audrey was the beginning and the end of him. Yeah.
It is really tragic love story in a way, and I think Audrey talks, I can't remember whether it was just before Fred died or might have even been around his funeral, where she says, I always thought that I could do better than him, but she kind of, I guess too late, came to realise that she couldn't, and he was a real big-hearted guy underneath, which he was, wasn't he? Despite all the deviousness and cheating and etc. He had so much love to give. He just didn't always express it in the most PC of ways.
No, and he also speaks a bit about... John Svident speaks a bit about the origin of Fred Elliott, and he based it on an old school friend of his, didn't he?
Yeah, somebody who was a butcher, somebody who worked on Ashton Market. He said that he would go have this black pudding story, and then so he went to go and see his mate Billy at his stall and found out how to make them. Although apparently, when you're making a black pudding, you never give away the exact mix of herbs and spices. It was a bit like the KFC, the market world. And he said, I always like to ask Billy whenever I need to know something, because I like to know what I'm talking about. So I'm sure lots of his butcherisms came from his mate, which was nice to think that he goes that extra mile to research his role.
I really like the way that Fred Elliott has got so many inspirations. There's so many cultural things that have gone into making this character.
Yeah, it's just that
much he cares
bit of this, bit of that. It's not. It is in no way a character who's just one note else. Or I come in, I read my lines, I could be anyone. He's living and breathing, and he comes from all these different inspirations. It just makes it feel
a bit richer,
completely rich and rounded. That was it. We kind of saw him, what was it, 5-6 episodes I think we said, and then he disappears off screen for a bit until 1995. When we get to see his butcher's shop, which was on Gas Street, back in the days when they used to go out and film on location. He had an actual butcher's shop there. This is when we saw Ashley for the first time as well, and we had, I can't remember, 15, 16-year-old Stephen Arnold playing Ashley, and at the time, the story is that Audrey is mad at Alf because he's made Betty his mayoress. So she's like, no, I want to go to, I fancy all the pomp and ceremony myself. I want to go to all the openings. I think she just didn't like some of the ceremony of it. I remember.
Well, she got bored, didn't she, at times?
Yeah, I remember there was the scene where Alf gets sworn in as mayor, and you have to go through the whole rigmarole of him refusing it, and then them going out and trying to persuade him to get. And she's like, "What the heck?" She liked to be on the front covers of the newspapers and go to fancy do's and have an excuse to buy a nice hat.
Yeah, she didn't care about the meaning of of any of it. She just wanted everyone to think she's important.
Yeah, so
which
eventually...
I totally understand.
So eventually Alf makes Betty from the pub his mayoress, but she wants to go to a leisure centre opening because she, it's a good excuse for a party. And so she goes to have to grab Fred from his shop and get him to escort her there. And Fred's still very much in his lechy stage at this point. That he goes there and then they cut the ribbon or whatever it was, I can't remember. And then Alf turns up and it's, what a kerfuffle there is. So there's a couple of episodes there. He makes a brief appearance in August where Jack buys a car off him. And then he's back again in November when he sells his pies to Jack and Vera Duckworth to sell in the Rovers, although people complain that they give them stomachache. And I think there was a few stories.
I'm going to say gas.
I think there was a few stories over the years of pies giving customers stomachache. It seems to be a bit of a recurring theme, certainly not the end for Fred. In the end of the year, another bizarre scene, and if you haven't seen this episode, you need to hunt it down. But it's an episode where Curly Watts gets sworn in to the Square Dealers. We've mentioned these Square Dealers a little bit before. How would you describe this society?
They're like the Masons.
Yeah, they're Masons of Weatherfield, aren't they? The secret handshake.
The secret society of men who really are waiting for Netflix to come around, or PlayStation to be invented, or darts to be put on Sky, so that they have something other to do than to sit around in drafty halls wearing sacks and making up special secret symbols. And
I think, maybe we've got some Masonic listeners, I'm not sure, but I know someone who's a Mason, and he's very secretive about some of the things, or most of the things that he gets up to there, but he talks about these long speeches that he has to learn when he goes to his hall.
I mean, sorry, it's not silly. Whatever, look.
I find it fascinating,
You guys
honestly,
are in a secret society of Conversation Street listeners, and, we have a secret handshake and stuff. You guys all know what that is.
They really went to town with the Square Dealers in Coronation Street. I can't remember what everything was, but you're a member of the inner rectangle and we're going to the quadrangles. And this weird scene where Curly's sworn in and very, very solemn faced. You got Fred, Eric Furman. I can't remember who else was there reading all these ridiculous sounding pledges. Full of various quadrilaterals peppered through it. It was hilarious.
Do you think this was fueled by a writer who wanted to be in the Masons and he wasn't allowed to be, so he got his revenge? Just the same way the Cult of Nero was clearly somebody who got kicked out of Scientology.
Clearly. I mean, we all love the Stonecutters episode of The Simpsons, don't we?
Oh yeah, the song.
This was, and I mean, they really. They came back to the idea of the Square Dealers quite a bit over the course of 6, 7, 8 years, and it used to be a thing that all the businessmen mostly of Coronation Street were into. I'm just bring it back again.
They've got what have they got now? They've got some kind of business kind of.
I don't know if they do, because Alf was also in the Warts, wasn't he? The Weatherfield retail traders, and I think that preceded the Square Dealers. I'm sure that the last person to mention the Square Dealers was Dev, so I think it's one of these things that's supposed to go on, but it's not really a thing. But I used to always love it where Fred, because he loved the idea of being in a position of power, didn't he? And he used to try and get a deal.
But we don't pursue it to the extent that these people do.
And I think that the idea for him that he was in this secret club who would give each other backhanders and sort each other out and do favours for each other and try and get good deals from each other. That was perfect for him.
It's definitely of benefit to you if you're going to join a club or society where everybody does each other favours. I mean, that's of great benefit, and everybody has a community whereby everyone does that to a certain extent. It's just when you start to have speeches and special handshakes and meetings and membership fees, it starts getting weird.
I remember quite often when they would have a tradesman come in on Coronation Street, he'd sidle up to them and go, do you deal squarely? And I kind of tip him the wink, and you
like,
generally they'd kind of shake their head, not know what he was talking about. But anyway, so that was 1995, but it was after that he was given the permanent role, and this was after Reg Holdsworth left. So they thought, well, we've got this guy. He's been popular. Let's bring him in, develop him, and the next 10 years speak for themselves. Well, they don't. We're going to speak about.
We're going to tell you what
so
happens.
1996 was basically the main stories were his pursuit of Rita. So the very first Weatherfield dame to catch his eye, apart from Audrey, and also the Betty's hotshot story when they buy a racehorse.
Well, I love this because Rita and Audrey, if you're going to go for a couple of babes of Coronation Street, those are the two top totty, aren't they?
Yeah, I tell you what, if Claudia...
Oh, God.
If Claudia Colby had been in the show at the same time as Fred, he'd have dropped everybody.
She would have eaten him alive, wouldn't she? She'd be like, darling, don't tell me about square dealings. Right, so anyway, he starts wooing Rita. He invites her to the ladies' night at the square dealers. And she actually quite enjoys this because she's the centre of attention. Because Fred's, the Grand Master. And so she decides to keep seeing him from time to time. And then the Weatherfield men all club together to buy the racehorse Betty's Hotshot. And eventually some of them realise that this is not all it's cracked up to be. So
it's a bit expensive having a horse.
It's a bit. They eat a lot. Grass is free, isn't it? But hay isn't. So anyway, Martin and Bill, they sell their shares to Fred. And the rest of the shareholders eventually realise that this is taking too much time. I mean, look at Tim and Tiny.
Well, yeah, what happened there?
Glue. So...
Well, Fred decides that the best option is to sell poor Betty's hotshot for horse meat, doesn't he? Always thinking of his business. Like,
well, I mean,
how can I profit from this?
He's got good links in Charleville to sell it to charcuterie.
Well, he would have done.
Well, the women find out about this and they say, no, find another way around this.
I can't remember what they ended up doing with Betty's hotshot in the end. Maybe they just give him back
into a donkey sanctuary.
Into the stables or something. I don't remember.
Right, Fred carries on seeing Rita. He gets a bit worried about Alec because he's a bit of a rival in love. And he has a falling out with Ashley after he helps his girlfriend Kelly, who's Daniel's nanny, to move into number one during work hours.
Yeah, Kelly I was never too keen on as a character.
I remember her.
She was
very
just
vaguely. She was just a bit of a troublemaker.
No, I don't think she was.
I thought she was annoying.
No, what? I don't think so. She was just very nanny-ish and kind of just a bit kind of plain and nice and to me
wholesome.
Yeah, very wholesome character, but
I don't remember.
Not that exciting.
Obviously. So Fred proposes to Rita in November, and she says, "I will agree to think about it."
Yeah, this is a story where the Wiltons, Derek and Mavis, are gonna get in on it as well.
For it.
Derek is desperate to become a member of the Square Dealers, and
he sees an in there because Mavis and Rita are tight. So if he can get Rita to marry Fred, then by association, he might have a better in there at the Square Dealers. But when Derek misses out on a place there, he has a row with Fred and accuses him of leading him on to try to get closer to Rita. And then Rita gets upset by this, and then Fred realises Rita's not really that into him, so he says, he lies to her and he says, I've proposed to two other women, and they both end the relationship kind of saving face in a way.
I don't think that Rita and Fred really would have had any legs. I think somebody who's going to be involved in Fred, you've got to be a bit of a romantic.
I think
and I don't see Rita like that. Yeah, she is.
I think she likes companionship, but I don't think she's a particularly needs people around. Like She's a childless woman who still has many, many close people to her that will call her family. But she doesn't live with anybody, apart from people that keep moving in, even though she doesn't really want them to. I admire Rita. I think she's great. But she doesn't need a man, does she?
Not really.
She wants a companion.
She's had a number of men over the year, but yeah, I just don't see them as working together. I think I think he'd have been too lusty for her.
Well, she also wants to be the main one, doesn't she? Rita's always the main one. And she wouldn't be the main one with Fred.
Looking at some of the other women, many of the other women that Fred ended up with over the years, they were just happy to be his arm candy.
Yeah, she was
and be
not.
Taken along to fancy events, and she wanted more than that.
Like, she's the sun around which everything must revolve, and I think Fred Elliott's a bit of a black hole.
I mean, we talk about the other men. This was the genesis of his serial proposing, which is something that lots of other people remember Fred for. It's the sort of thing that, again, in the wrong hands, could have not worked, but they were able to space out his proposals just perfectly. And whenever Fred was rebuffed, you felt that kind of stab him deep in the heart. And then when people accepted his proposal, it was like the most wonderful thing ever. I think it was such a funny aspect to his personality that he just couldn't help but blurt it out. And you can see the look on his face when he realises, oh, I've done it again.
Yeah, I've messed up again. All I want is love, but I can't get it. It reminds me of, have you heard of this story about the loneliest whale in the ocean?
No, I have not.
Well, it sings in the wrong frequency and the other whales can't hear it.
Sad.
I know, it's really tragic, but Fred is the loneliest whale because he's singing a song that nobody wants to hear. His whole life he just wants this. I don't think he can get what he really wants because I don't think he knows, but he's pursuing it relentlessly for the whole time he's in the show.
Yeah, he just wants love because he's such a big-hearted man.
Yes.
And he likes the idea of having a woman on his arm for him. I think in some ways he wants somebody to look after and provide for and, cook a nice roast dinner for on Sunday.
But he's also like you said, he's really larger than life, but he goes after people that aren't suited to him, like an elephant trying to date a butterfly. Like, it's never going to work out because they're too different.
I don't know who would have been properly perfect for Fred.
Some, like I said, some people maybe never will quite find that little jigsaw piece for them.
One interesting quote I found out about Fred and his thoughts on women. This was a lot of these quotes are coming from the old Coronation Street magazines of the 90s. That John Svident said, one of the attractions of being in the Square Dealers is that no women are allowed. He enjoys the company of men because despite his efforts to prove otherwise, he just doesn't completely understand women. And I wonder whether some of this proposal was just like, I think I need to have a female companion.
Is that what you want?
Is this going to make my life complete? But
it's really frustrating, like this whole generation of people that have been separated by arbitrary gender roles that kind of are completely made up and feel like they can't understand one another. And he really does feel like that makes sense, that he's of a generation whereby he thinks that men and women are completely different and there's not really much common ground there.
He just got so soppy with some of them sometimes. Right, so 1997. So this is the year of Maureen Holdsworth, who then became Elliot, but only very briefly. So Rita was history. There's a few little stories towards the beginning of 97 based around the Betty's Hotshot horse. He ends up pocketing £1,000 after betting on the horse following a tip-off that he doesn't tell the others about, which ties perfectly into his devious personality.
Which is silly too, because he didn't benefit more from not telling anybody.
No, I just think he sometimes like lording it over people, to be honest. And despite being one of the wealthiest characters Coronation Street has ever seen, he never resisted the opportunity to make more money.
Well, I mean, 1997, £1,000, you could have bought Buckingham Palace for that.
So he started getting friendly with Maureen after meeting her at a singles night. So Maureen had been dumped by Reg in the previous year. Because I think the story with Reg was he went off to Lowestoft, didn't he, to manage a store there, but then he ends up having an affair with one of the women that worked there. And
a very weird ending.
He had a really strange ending, and I don't know. He he didn't have a proper ending.
No, he didn't.
We'll go back to Fred in a minute, but Reg's last big story that I remember is when he was accused of being the Weatherfield Thrasher.
Yeah,
and he had the line up at the police station, which is a hilarious scene. And then he just goes off to Lowestoft and we don't see him again. It felt like hurrying him out the door after Bet, to be honest. Anyway, Maureen was definitely free and single at that point, and they start dating, and Maureen's mum Maud is not particularly impressed by this, and I'm not surprised.
Not impressed by anything. Maud was just born unimpressed.
Maud liked Bill for Maureen, didn't she? Because Bill Webster, there wasn't a devious bone in his body. He was a friendly, loving.
When he was younger, though, I wouldn't trusted him.
Well, maybe not so much, but he offered the reliability. He wasn't a buffoon. I mean, the thing with Maud is that she didn't suffer fools gladly, and coming off the back of Reg Holdsworth, the biggest fool there was in Maud's eyes, at least. Then you had Fred, who was also this
both of them
blustering. He wasn't
pompous idiot.
Yeah, basically. Whereas Bill was a lot more kind of on the level, yeah. So she thinks that Fred is going to be after the shop, the corner shop that they were still, Maureen was still in charge of. There was also a funny scene in early '97 where he's trying to teach Ashley golf, and they go to the golf course there, and Mike's there trying to teach Curly golf. I can't remember what the reason that Curly needed to play golf was.
Is it trying to teach golf? Is that how you say it, or is it?
Well,
teaching them how to
golf.
I
realised that when I said that Mike was teaching Curly golf, it made it sound a bit like crazy golf, but it's a bit curly golf.
Oh.
But anyway, they each bet each other £50 that their own student will win.
I'll tell you, we're just going to quickly interject here and say Coronation Street is really missing out on businessmen at the moment. I don't feel like we've got any fun, cool, apart from Dev.
Yeah.
But he's not focused on business anymore.
No.
Evelyn cares more about the corner shop than Dev does.
I mean, you had Stephen last year. Sometimes some of the business stories got a bit dull.
I know, but it's not the business so much as the personalities behind it, because some of the biggest names in Corrie have been businessmen. But, like you say, the stories for business is dull, but the characters are not. Well,
both Fred and Mike were very much of the cutthroat businessman type, weren't they? So they're both betting each other anyway that their student will win. Fred cheats. But Curly wins anyway. And Fred is like, right, I'm fed up. He chucks his club into a thicket, falls in, breaks his leg when he tries to go and get it, and ends up on the golf course overnight.
Oh no!
But it's all right, because when he gets back to the house afterwards, he's in for a bit of a surprise. I don't know, maybe a bit of both, because he walks in on Maxine doing a sexy striptease for Ashley, and it's great because she's standing there with I can't remember. I've got a picture of Tracy Shaw standing there with no.
You've got a picture of Tracy Shaw standing there with
just in my head. Head.
Only in your head. That's okay then.
Her back's to me in this picture.
Oh, right.
And she kind of chucks her bra over her shoulder and it lands on Fred, and he's just like, I don't know what I'm looking at.
Can you promise me not to rotate that image?
I can't. I promise. So anyway, so that was a great scene. But then this brush with death at the golf course gets him thinking about his own mortality, and he decides to leave everything but the shop in his will to Maureen.
So this is his butcher shop?
Yes.
Okay.
So he convinces Maureen to marry him and says, look, maybe we should combine businesses. He was always on the lookout for a good deal and a chance to merge with one business or another. And
let's merge our businesses. Let's merge our businesses.
It was. That was the pillow talk of '97 between those two. Maud does not like this. She just hates the idea of Maureen getting involved in this guy, and she ends up squirting a fire hydrant over him at one point in retaliation. But it's no good. She can't stop the course of true love. And in September, I think it was, the pair get married in this huge ceremony. They have a register office, but they have a barbershop quartet there. It's lovely. because there was one thing you can say about Fred is he really knew how to push the boat out when it came to romance.
Bon vivant.
Yeah. He the flowers, the quartet,
grand
the chocolate.
gestures,
So
left, right, and
because
centre.
he had such a big heart combined with his big bank balance, and Maureen was just carried away with the excitement of it all, but the two just weren't good for each other, and she allowed herself to be caught up in the excitement of it, but within days of getting married, she realised
that she was on the Titanic heading for an iceberg.
Really was. She talked about being trapped, and this isn't what she wants, and why did I let myself get carried away like this?
She's also because he they have a conga line down the street, and then they get to number 4, and he says, "I've bought number 4. We're going to live there, but Maud's not moving in." And Maureen and Maud are very close.
Yeah.
And she starts to realise that this isn't.
Well, when Maureen was married to Reg, there was a bit of a tension over is Maud going to live with us or not, and I think that Fred had, I can't remember, I think he might have even told Maureen, yeah, it's fine, your mum can live with us, but then when he buys this house, it's clear that Maud isn't welcome, and for various very important reasons, Maureen decides that this isn't for me, and within a week or two she's bogged off to Germany with Bill.
Yeah, because Fred kicks Bill out of the corner shop flat to try to get rid of his rival, but he decides to go to Germany, and Maureen goes with him.
That was such a great scene. Bill's there in the back of the cab, driving down the street. Maureen's there, and he's like, stop. Maureen, come on to Germany with me. And she sees this chance to escape and disappears off around the corner, and that's the last we saw of her for nearly 10 years or so.
And Fred really does not take this well, does he?
Oh, God. This is one of Corrie's great heartbreak scenes, isn't it?
It really... They did such a great job with this, because Fred went from riding high, didn't he, on his wedding day, showing off to everybody, look at me, look at my life, look at my bride, look at how much fun I'm having. And then he gets, she runs off with someone else, and then he just spends the rest of the time shut in the
weeks,
house.
Yeah, curtains drawn,
swooning on the sofa, drinking, smoking, lamenting.
Yeah, and the fact that it came from a character who we're up until this point so used to seeing carefree.
We've never seen him like this before.
No, he was so fantastic, and because we'd all grown to love him, despite his many flaws and being so devious and not nasty, but underhand at times, your heart just broke for him. But you were also sympathising with Maureen as well, because you could see that she was trapped in
get swallowed by
this marriage. Exactly. He would. Yeah. They were not well suited at all.
But this just goes to show, like, John Svident's confidence as a performer too, to take this character and turn him, even in his depression, he was still, a big character, wasn't he? He was the most depressed, the saddest ever.
Yeah,
so great.
This scene was part of a really strong couple of weeks or months in Coronation Street, because this was all tied around the same time as Don Brennan was on his last legs as well. Last leg, I suppose, in the Don's case. Autumn 97 in Corrie, top draw stuff. Brian Park, that was. So anyway, he ends up buying the shop from Maureen after conning Maud into accepting a low offer from it, and Maud ends up getting revenge on him by dropping a fish behind a shelving unit. They're having a bit of a renovation at the shop, and Maud in a wheelchair kind of goes up to a shelf, puts a fish down there, and she was great at playing the sweet innocent little old lady when she needed to, wasn't she? But she was a canny thing herself, and for weeks there's this stench coming from the corner shop, and they couldn't find out where it is. But anyway, we end the year with Ashley as manager of the corner shop, and Ashley ends up rehiring Maud out of pity for her. Don't underestimate Maud Grimes. That's the lesson that you learn after that, I think.
That was a really dramatic turn, wasn't it, from Fred, and it kind of called upon John Svident's experience as some of his more serious roles, really, wasn't it? great.
Yeah, as I say, I've seen so little of what he did before Coronation Street, but I can imagine more of it was on the serious side.
I mean, A Clockwork Orange.
That's quite serious, isn't it?
I don't know how funny it was.
Although the panto,
the panto of Clockwork
No,
Orange?
the panto of Robin Hood that he was in. Probably more on the comedic
Hello,
side.
children. We're going to see it. We're going to do an adaptation today.
So 1998 was more back to Audrey, wasn't it? He, despite the fact that he never really settled down with anyone for a long term, there wasn't often a time where he wasn't in pursuit of someone.
Somebody in his sights. So he's not happy because Ashley's getting involved with Zoe Tattersall, who has
She was like she was the one of the earliest scally characters that Coronation Street has had. Yeah,
sad urchin.
But Ashley takes pity on her and takes her in, and Fred's not happy about this.
No, not a good idea. So he tries to get rid of her by evicting them both from number 4. But Zoe knows what's what, and she says they've got rights as sitting tenants, so he has to let them stay. But then baby Shannon dies.
Yeah, Zoe's little kid dies of meningitis.
And Fred pays for the funeral.
Yeah, Ashley's not impressed with him backtracking on this, but yeah,
kind of blames him, but it wasn't really his fault. Alf stands down as councillor, and Fred and Alec both back Audrey as a candidate. Well, this is when she was standing against Spider Nugent. They tried to disparage Spider and use all these underhand tactics to make him look bad.
Fred was perfect for this, trying to find the dirt on somebody.
Well, I mean, he's been in prison, hasn't he, Spider, for his for his beliefs. Audrey eventually beats Spider by 7 votes anyway, and then Fred decides to start courting Audrey once more. Now she's a powerful woman. She's more attractive, but he tells Alf, I'm only interested in her for politics. I'm not trying to woo her or anything.
And I think in some ways he liked he was the master dealer of the square dealers, and he liked being on top. He liked to be the king of the castle, and having now one of his close friends being the mayoress of Weatherfield, perfect to move in there and take any handouts that may come along with that.
Well,
get those opportunities to sell his pies far and wide.
Like Game of Thrones, you've got to unite your houses, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly.
So Audrey uses Fred to get the salon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she persuades him to buy the salon for her. Like she realises that he's trying to get something out of her, and she's like, "Well, Fred, can you try and get me the salon?" But actually, it's just a way of getting Alf to buy the salon. Like, I'm not explaining this very well at all. Apologies. She gets Fred to offer to buy her the salon so that Alf will get his nose put out of joint and offer to buy it himself, because Alf was such a skinflint, he wouldn't ever put his hand in his pocket to buy it. Does that make sense?
Okay, but Alf and Audrey, at this point,
are married, yeah.
So, but Fred's still trying to woo her.
Yeah.
And then by making Audrey plays them off against each other, basically.
Basically that. This is like Alf's one of his last stories, because it was Christmas, New Year of that year that he ended up dying in the chair. Do you remember? In the Black's Health, and then sadly Brian Molesley not long afterwards.
So Fred has a luxury hamper raffle in his shop, and he rigs it because he wants Audrey to win it, hoping that this is going to get him invited to Christmas dinner. But instead of doing that, Audrey gives the hamper to Gail and Martin, and then they all spend Christmas Day with Alf and not with Fred there.
Making the comparison to Fred again, it was a bit like it's not Fred, Reg. I mean, it was like when Reg rigged the it was a raffle that he got Rita to win, wasn't it? And she won the trolley dash at Better Buys or Freshco's or whatever it was.
But it also reminds me of when Derek won the cutlery canteen and didn't give it to Mavis.
Oh yeah.
Oh, you know what? You can spark so many romantic stories from a raffle win on Coronation Street. I don't know why they don't use that more often.
So 1999 was where more of the family revelations come out. So we spoke earlier about Fred's backstory and having Ashley, fathering Ashley, and then having to give him away. Up until 1999, that wasn't the original plan for the character. It couldn't have been. Ashley was brought in as the nephew, but it was around this time that I think the showrunners thought, well, you know, it'd make a good story if Ashley was actually his son, because they John Svident and Stephen Arnold had such a brilliant chemistry and relationship on screen. It was so sweet, and Stephen's character Ashley was often the one that had to rein Fred in, and they just had each other really, and they were in the shop together, and I, as much as I don't usually like retconny sort of stories, it really did feel right, and the way that it was played out was very, very sweet when the revelation came out, wasn't it?
Corrie likes to funnel everybody closer and closer and closer, and reveal that oh, Carla and Johnny, they're actually father and daughter. You know, if you're related in some obscure way to somebody, there's going to be a revelation at some point that you're actually
a bit closer related than you thought.
You're more distantly related, like say stepson and stepmother, then you end up getting it on.
Before all that happened with Ashley though, 1999, Fred gets a new butcher's counter at Freshco's supermarket and gets Ashley to do his work there. He ends up selling the corner shop to a new family on the street, the Desais, and there's a bit of deceit going on with that as well, because Ravi, who's also a bit of a canny businessman himself, sends his daughter Nita in as a bit of an undercover agent, and she's working there behind the counter at the corner shop, trying to get the details on, you know, what's this worth? How can my dad take advantage of this? But anyway, the what happens is Fred finds out about this, tricks Ravi back by making him believe there's going to be a new estate built on the Red Wreck, and that's sure to bring in plenty more customers, isn't it, Ravi? And Ravi's like, oh yeah, brilliant. I'm going to offer you a higher price than it's actually worth. But then Maud, who's still smarted from the way that Fred conned her, tells Ravi that he's being tricked. And basically, Fred and Ravi end up being locked inside the shop and thrashing it out until a fair deal is reached. So after that, we saw Fred starting to get closer to Audrey again. As I said, Alf's out of the picture now. Audrey's, on the market, according to Fred. So he sort of starts getting close to her, and this is when he reveals to her that he has got a secret son. And Audrey's like, I'll keep it a secret for you, Fred, honestly. But Audrey's word when it comes to secrets, you can't trust it, can you? So almost straight away she ends up revealing to Maxine that Fred's got a son. We don't know who this son is at this point.
No,
Maxine, who is going out, I can't remember whether she was going out with Ashley or married to him at this point, but she tells him, and Ashley's like, Uncle Fred, Uncle Fred, what's this about you having a secret son? And Fred reveals that it's him who's the son. Brilliant scenes as these two characters who were so close Ashley now realising that his whole life was a bit of a lie, and he kind of takes it pretty harshly at first. He tells Fred, I don't want to talk to you ever again. Isn't he? Exactly. Eventually, obviously, as we all know, he ends up accepting Fred and says, "Oh, Dad, I'm so proud that you're my father." And Fred ends up changing his will so that Ashley inherits everything, and it's very, very, very sweetly done. And not just I'm your dad. Oh, okay then. Which almost felt, I can't remember, maybe I'm remembering it wrongly, but when Carla found out that Johnny was her dad just recently, I don't think it had quite the same emotional impact as this did, because I think a lot of it was the goodwill that the viewers at the time had built up between Fred and Ashley that maybe we hadn't done with Carla and Johnny. Again,
like I've said many times before on the show, when you've got a cast, and with the addition recently, another new regular cast member we've just had, there are almost 100 regular cast members. You can't be as detached to them as you are to these characters of past, because they were there all the time. Everything revolved around a much smaller group of people, and therefore you felt a stronger connection.
Exactly. So Fred is not impressed with Ashley getting back together with Maxine after this. And he also has a few romantic issues of his own in the second half of the year when Audrey turns down his proposal at the Freshco ball. So I don't know if anyone's keeping a proposal tally at the moment, but
we should really have one.
What are we on? 3? We should have a little in the corner, yeah. Audrey says, look, I've only just become aware. Alf's only not been dead a year. It's too soon. I care deeply about you, but no. Ashley does manage to get a fiancé of his own at the ball though, because he proposes to Maxine and she accepts. Although she does at first think that Ashley and Fred have been having a weird let's both try and get brides at the ball. But
yeah, it's
Ashley's
not
like, no, I didn't know
like
that my dad was going to propose.
it's
Honestly,
part of a weird double proposal plan.
There's a little story in September maybe when we see Maud off on her final storyline. She ends up getting engaged to this guy called Sydney, who Audrey and Fred think that he's after her money. Do you remember?
Yeah, I do remember this.
Great episode where Fred and Audrey take this old codger out in the back of the car to try and find out, what
he's up to.
What are you up to? Why are you so interested in Maud all of a sudden? Why are you getting married to her? And he ends up dying in the back seat of the car. And poor Fred and Audrey have to carry this corpse around.
If anyone ever tries to interrogate me, I'm just going to die.
If Audrey had been found, she's now twice been driving a car with a corpse in after the whole
That's true.
Teddy thing last year. I mean, I think it was probably Fred that was driving, but close enough.
I think being in a car with a corpse more than once,
unless you're one of the Shuttleworths.
If you're not an undertaker, it's highly suspicious. or a mafia boss.
So going into the autumn, Ashley decides that he wants to know a little bit more about his birth mum, Kathleen. And Fred's like, oh, she's gone to live in Australia. Forget
Sounds
about it.
Right.
Yeah. However, she's actually just living in Oldham, just down the road. And Fred goes over and warns her, look, between thee and me, Ashley's looking for you. I think Fred's quite happy for the status quo to remain and for Ashley not to.
Not that much changes for him once Ashley finds out he's his dad, because they already had a very close relationship. They're already family anyway. But now Ashley's talking about bringing in somebody new.
And to kind of upset the apple cart a little bit. But Kathleen ends up being a bit curious about that, and she goes to Freshco's to see Ashley. And I remember there being a scene where she's like queuing up in the counter, and he serves her, and eventually she reveals her identity to him. It's very sweet in the end of the day. She ends up going to the wedding, and over the course of the rest of the year, she becomes a bit of a bigger part in Ashley's life. It's just all very nice in the end. And then she disappears off. I can't remember whether she turned up at Ashley's funeral in the end, but there were some quite sweet scenes there, I remember. And at the very end of the year, we get to see one of Fred's less successful business ventures when he decides to sell reindeer meat at Freshco. I can't remember how that came about that he had a pallet load of reindeer meat. It's best
not to ask, I think.
No, and but he dresses up as Father Christmas, and Ashley's there as an elf. But unsurprisingly, nobody wants to buy it. Fred gets kicked in the shin by a kid who thinks that he's selling Rudolph. And at the end, he gets up putting the stocks at the Millennium party for trying to make a reindeer stew with the leftovers. Do you want to head into the new Millennium with Fred? This first year was about this is when the Victoria Street set expanded for the first time, and so they thought it would be a good idea to put the butcher shop there. And we also get a little bit more between him and Audrey, don't we?
And the pub stuff too.
Oh yes, of course, yeah.
So Fred starts the year in trouble because a masseuse that he's seeing for his back pain gets arrested for running a lewd house.
Yeah, just a classic beginning of the year throwaway story for Fred there.
Then there's the Cartwright murders. This was Ken being a detective. There's a book that accompanies this, which I've still not read.
Got it.
Ken discovers Bernard Cartwright, who is a murderer, was Fred's grandfather. And the body is... there's a body that's been dug up in Victoria Street. They think it's one of his victims. it turns out to be Tony Horrocks.
Yeah, Natalie's son. Yeah, as Fred was like, you're besmirching the name of my butchers. My grandfather would never do that. That was an odd story. It seemed like it was kind of put in there as a bit of a tie into the book.
Happened.
Anyway, bit peculiar.
Fred gets annoyed when Maxine starts golfing and she's much better than anyone thought she would be.
That was a bit like the Devon Burney story that we had last year, wasn't it?
I mean, the moral of the story is even, 23 years later, that it's quite surprising when a woman is good at anything. Good job.
Well, if it's a man's thing, like, golf, as these characters would say.
Is it a man's thing? That's my question.
Alma was good at golf, wasn't she?
Oh, what a surprise. It's like when a dog can speak. Anyway, so he relocates his butcher shop to Victoria Street because he hears that a supermarket is going to be opening up on the place. He's got his butcher shop at the moment. He thinks, this is not very good for me. I won't be able to compete with that. So he moves it. And then he gets held at gunpoint in the Fresco siege.
It's all go in 2000 for Fred, yeah.
He goes on holiday to Paris with Maxine, Ashley and Audrey. He proposes to Audrey and she accepts, but then she changes her mind because, the croissant's gone through the system now. She doesn't fancy it anymore. He's heartbroken, and when they get back to Weatherfield, he gives her the cold shoulder. And then at the very end of the year, Doug gets Fred and Mike drunk, and he convinces them to buy in to the pub with him. So these three are a trio that own the pub, and this is when Natalie
for a short while
sells up.
Yeah, I think it was a really good move to put Fred in the Rovers, wasn't it? He
seems like a really natural landlord, doesn't he?
This is very much about this year getting him onto the street. You got him in the Rovers, you got the Butchers on Victoria Street. He was such the life and soul and the heart of the show, wasn't he? Yet for so long he was based outside of it, and if you got a character as strong as him, you want to have him be able to pop up all over the place. Yeah. So but he, as a landlord character, he was perfect. He had the patter. He had the great presence. If you picture a traditional booming British landlord, then you're not going to stray too far away from the likes of Fred. Yeah, exactly. I just loved it. I don't remember him doing a lot of work in the pub. It was more often a case of he was just there at a bar, with his Scotch gin threat, leaning on the bar, having a bit of a gossip with everyone else that was there. I thought that was a really, really strong move. Now, the other kind of thing I suppose it's worth us mentioning here at the end of 2000 was when they had the 40th anniversary episode of Coronation Street. And if you've seen that, you might remark on the fact that despite the fact that he was a very prominent character so much of the rest of the time, Fred Elliott didn't appear there, did he? He'd been attacked.
Not Fred Elliott.
Well, not Fred Elliott, John Svident. I know of it very well now from doing the podcast, but I don't remember this really happening at the time. Must have been a huge story.
They gave his lines to Dev, as I recall, didn't they?
Yeah, they did it. They had to do a quick rewrite, and but basically the story goes is that John Svident was out at a bar in Manchester for World AIDS Day, where he'd been making a personal appearance, and he gets chatting to this guy called Michael Smith, takes him back to his flat, and Michael stabs him in the neck, and he was it sounds like he's a bit of a psycho from some.
You can't say that.
Well, I mean, he said himself, Michael. Well, according to John, when this came to trial, he was there in his bedroom charging his phone. Michael comes up to him and is like, have you ever met a schizo before? And then he stabs him twice in the neck, and poor John's lost nearly 2 pints of blood. This guy has done a runner, tried to nick his posh car, and John has to phone the ambulance. It sounds like he was really, really close to not making it out alive from that.
This guy, Michael Smith's very troubled. 60 previous convictions. He was serving life in prison at the moment, I guess.
Yeah.
He's not dead. I don't know.
No, I don't.
He's done violent robberies. His attack on John Svident got him 7 years by itself.
Yeah, but during the trial, I think the story goes is that Michael did a runner, committed a load of other crimes there. He was a very, very troubled man. I'm just so
If you want to find
thankful.
out more about this, look it up, because there's a lot more we're not going to talk about.
There's an awful lot. I mean, I
can't really get very far into it without hitting a bunch of speculation that we are not going to discuss.
No, there's plenty out there. You can even read transcripts of the 999 call, and it's really harrowing. John's like there saying, I think I'm dying. I think I'm dying. He says, "I don't go. I'm John Svident. I play Fred Elliott in Coronation Street. Don't let this get out to the press." Good luck with that. But poor guy. And yeah, Corrie got so close to losing a legend there. Thank goodness the paramedics were able to get there in time. But yeah, he was soon back on the show again with I think he ends up coming back with like a plaster on his neck that he puts down to a stray butchering incident. But yeah, he is back in fine form in 2001. And this was all about losing the Rovers, getting it back again, and also the story with Eve Sykes, who is Linda Sykes' mum. If we just start with the Rovers stuff now, as fun as it was to put Fred up there as one of the Rovers owners, it became clear pretty early in 2001 that these three guys, Dougie, Mike, Fred, were pretty unsuitable owners. They were just interfering with the management of the pub, drinking away the profits, always trying to one-up each other about who was the top boss. And it was quite fun seeing these. All three of them were very underhanded kind of businessmen trying to get one over each other and pull the wool over each other's eyes. And in March, Dougie ends up getting the upper hand when he tells the others, right, I want to get out of this triumvirate, and convinces Fred and Mike to sell up as well, and they do, to this business called Hamilton Griffiths Holdings, not realising that Dougie is actually the main investor of that company, so they've just sold their shares to him, and now he's in charge of the pub. Congrats, Dougie.
No.
Yeah, so Fred's out of the Rovers, but don't worry, Fred fans, he doesn't stay away for long. Dougie ends up dying at the hands of Richard Hillman. So there's also a funny little story, and Fred did have these every now and again, like little comedic sized stories. And there was one in the spring of 2001 where he organises a competition between the local butchers, the Weatherfield Sausage Trail. Which...
Is it the trail or the trial?
Trail. I think it's like going from... I'm pretty sure it's trail.
Pub crawl.
Yeah, but for sausages. Exactly. And whoever has the best sausage wins. Ashley ends up entering separate from Fred. I think they say, one of them's representing Freshco and one of them representing Victoria Street. But Fred ends up getting insanely jealous when Ashley's sausage wins. And he accuses her of being vegetarian, because this is around the time, I think, that Maxine... turned veggie and convinced Ashley to try go turn veggie as well. But anyway, Fred ends up with egg on his face. It's analysed, it's revealed to be pure meat. So
well, that wouldn't make the best sausage.
What wouldn't?
Pure meat, no.
Well, it did in this case.
Need a bit of flavourings and fillings.
The son has overtaken the father at last in the sausage steaks. So, this is where Eve Sykes comes along. And like I said, she was the mum of Linda Sykes, who was a bit of a scally, wasn't she? That was a factory girl that ended up seducing Mike Baldwin just for the love of power. But Eve Sykes was also... She wasn't proper rough.
The whole family was rotten, Michael.
Okay, maybe they were a little bit. She's working at the Turk's Head, is Eve, where Fred goes one day. Before long, they're dating.
This even works for an evil pub.
I know, not even, a rival to the Rovers.
Well, no, it's racist pub.
There's a dinner party scene. I think Mike and Linda invite Fred and his new woman along for dinner, and then when Eve turns up and realises, hang on a minute, what's my daughter doing here? I think that they'd been estranged, Linda and Eve, for a while. I don't think Eve was the best of mums, to be honest. Anyway,
she was the best of mums, she was the worst of mums.
Fred realises through this that Eve is Dean Sykes' mum, and Dean was one of the guys who held him at gunpoint at the Freshco's siege the previous year. So
played by the guy.
Played by Kieran Griffiths, who now plays Damon Hay. Yeah.
Evil.
Yeah, he's right onto the core, that guy. But anyway, Fred decides not to punish the mother for the sins of the son, much like David with Shona, I suppose.
Oh, nice.
And says, well, let's give it a go. I remember not being particularly impressed with the character of Eve the first time round. And I think, in the pantheon of Corrie matriarch, she's not exactly going to be at the top of anybody's list. But when it was recently repeated on ITV3, I think I gained a bit of a newfound appreciation of her. But, she was only on the show for a year, 2 years max, I can't remember. And yeah, she just didn't really seem to fit in. She was a bit of an outsider for me. She didn't really have that great Corrie humour that you need to be a classic matriarch, and then she ended up being a proper wrong un. But for the time being, at least, they were fairly.
They rubbed along all right.
Yeah, exactly. She wasn't. I don't think she was Fred's type, because he, up until this point, liked to have the women who were happy to be looked after by him and hang off his arm, and Audrey liked going to all the do's, and Maureen she liked to have a real man to do real men things. And actually, Eve, growing up,
sister's doing it for herself.
She lived on the estate. She was a single mum for a lot of her time. She didn't really. But yeah, they made a good go of it.
It's funny because Fred wanted to be the man that somebody needed, but when a woman really didn't need a man, he didn't know what to do. Yeah. But he wasn't really a man that would do much in the way of anything except buying you flowers and remembering on your anniversary. Not even providing necessarily, because he's never really in a relationship long enough to prove that he was a good breadwinner.
Well,
you know what I mean? Even though he made enough for himself, I guess.
He certainly had to provide to Eve for one of her first stories, not that she realised it.
Oh, yeah.
She ends up losing her job at the Turk's Head, and Fred says to Dougie, look, can you give her a job at the Rovers? I'll pay her wages.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
I mean, it sounds, a bit underhanded at first, but, what's the harm in it?
Oh, it's so sweet.
But Dougie ends up taking complete advantage of him and just gives her every shift under the sun, so Fred has to pay these hundreds and hundreds of pounds every week to...
It's surprising that he didn't kill Dougie, really.
Yeah, really.
Dougie had it coming one way or another.
Dougie was... He came
in
as
I
did mostly, but he came in as a real nasty piece of work. I remember because Dougie's son Tom was a stylist at the salon, and Dougie was not having any of that because he was a roughy rugby man. But yeah, he lives by the sword, dies by falling off of a flight of stairs with a wonky banister, as the saying goes.
I'll tell you what I don't like on Corrie, and that's a flip-flopper. I know he flip-flopped his way to death, but he always knew what he wanted, Dougie, didn't he? And he got it.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
So Fred, Eve eventually finds out that Fred is paying for her wages. She's mortified by this, the fact that it's her boyfriend that's bankrolling her without realising.
I'd be so mad too, because I'd say, give it to me directly and let's save a third on income tax, please. It's romantic in theory, isn't it? Like so many things that happened in rom-coms over the past. Yeah.
This is a proper rom-com story, this
100 years.
She's mortified, but Fred ends up chasing her down the street and proposing to her. That was his best,
patch it up quick.
In the arsenal, that's Fred's one that he will usually reach for. And she accepts.
Finishing move.
Basically is, yeah. They marry quickly. Audrey is completely convinced that this woman is a gold digger. But she ends up being a little bit in a way.
Well, she spent all her time earning the money that he was giving her to start with.
Do you remember at their wedding? This was when Linda mysteriously disappears. So the actress who played Linda wanted to leave the programme, but she was pregnant, wasn't she? And she had to leave earlier than they were expecting her to leave, and they even got a double to play Linda at the wedding from behind.
Her to not turn up.
No, so the character ends up just going missing after the wedding, and Mike is prime suspect. So there was a whole load of great drama there. Eve decides, though, that she doesn't like living in the same house that Fred spent many years married to Sybil in.
That was a long time ago, love.
I know. She just wanted somewhere bigger and better, and so, she's had this real kind of rough upbringing, and now she's married into money. She wants somewhere to call her own.
Fred's not living on the street, is she?
No, he's still got his big
This reminds me of George Shuttleworth.
Yeah.
Like, why have you got this mansion you don't really live in? You're always hanging around the street and taking up space and flopping on someone's sofa.
Well, Fred did live in this big house at the time, but Eve's not interested. She wants to move onwards and upwards. And after a brief spell living with Maxine and Ashley, which has a quite funny side story where they think that Fred is snoring raucously during the night, but it actually turns out to be Eve.
Oh, just like Fred and
George. Yeah. Anyway, Fred ends up buying the Rovers for £76,000 at the end of the year because Dougie's got fed up of it, and so we enter 2002.
This is the year. This is the year of the Civil War reenactment. This is the year of being a landlord, and this is the year of bigamy.
I think that this bigamy storyline, I mean, it was the bigamy, this story was quite close. I can't remember which one came first now, to the Shelley and Peter bigamy story, and it feels like maybe they came a bit too close after each other, but I think for a character like Fred, who is so unlucky in love, and he always thinks he's going in the right direction, but it just the carpet gets pulled out from underneath. This was a perfect story for him, and it got to show off some more utter heartbreak.
Well, even Fred move into the Rovers, and Eve does not get on very well with Betty. I'm going to change that. Betty doesn't get on with anybody.
No, she doesn't.
Betty hates everybody, almost. Fred tries to trick her into giving them the hot pot recipe, but she gives him a fake one with too much pepper in it. And then Fred decides to sign the Rovers over to Eve for tax reasons.
Bad move.
And he starts getting suspicious of her. She's going out mysteriously, and he follows her and discovers she's visiting her ex, Ray.
Yeah, this is Linda's dad, Ray Sykes.
That's right. Ray knows that Linda is living in Ireland secretly. And when Fred confronts Ray, he learns actually that Ray and Eve never divorced, and therefore he's committing bigamy.
Eve really reveals her true colours here. Well, I say true colours, but I think it felt like it was a bit
revealing what was always there.
No. I think changing. It was more like the character. God, she just came out of. She was quite hard faced. But in her final scenes with Fred, when he confronts her with this truth that he's uncovered about her past, she really turns into a nasty piece of work, and she says some absolutely vile things to him. And very quickly went from like, I don't really mind this character, she's not that exciting, to get her off my show, she's horrible.
Well, they're for row, she walks out, he's sad, but then she comes back a few weeks later and says, look, the Rovers is mine. And he refuses to give it up, and she says, I'm going to report you to the police. He says, I'm going to report you to the police.
For bigamy.
And she ends up backing down, and
Classic
that's...
Corrie blackmail.
Then he's just in charge of the Rovers. Then we have the Civil War reenactment. Roy's organising it, and Fred gets super involved in this. I love how well they picked this idea and concept to base around the characters of Roy and Fred.
This is for the Jubilee, wasn't it? The Golden Jubilee.
You've got the Roundheads and the Cavaliers, and so you've got, how would you... It's like cold, logical, like joyless people versus...
opulence.
Just a rampant consumerism, I don't know.
Fred was great in this story. This is
the worst of both of these characters embodied in these two sides of the Civil War. So you've got Fred like prancing around with feathers and red velvet,
and then Roy on the other hand saying, "No, they would never have worn this into battle." But Fred, he was such a showman, wasn't he?
He doesn't care,
and he's like, "This isn't about historical accuracy. This is what we're putting on the show for Her Majesty." And he ends up saying, "Well, we need to make it so that the Cavaliers win. It's the Royalists that win," and Roy hates the idea.
They have this They have the event is a farce. It descends into anarchy. Roy and Fred get led away by security. They take the fight to the cobbles, with Roy having Fred on the ground by the end of it with a pike to his throat.
You get to see a bit of a side of Roy that is usually hidden.
I'm going to say Roy has had these flashes of violence. Let's remember this, as it might come up soon in the show. But he tried to kill Fred with a pike. He took a shotgun into the supermarket. He beat Gary Windus with a bat.
I know.
He set fire to the boat with Simon in it. Let's remember this because it might come up later.
I think that for a celebration for the Golden Jubilee, this was brilliant, and you're right, those two were perfectly cast as the leaders of the opposing sides. And it was nice for Fred to throw himself into a little project after recently finding that he'd been living bigamously.
He decides to step back from managing the pub, and that is when we get Lillian Spencer, played by Maureen Lipman, to turn up for a week to give us some hilarious episodes.
I don't think that Fred proposes to Lillian, but he might as well have done it. He was probably very, very close to it. This was a character who he was totally smitten with, because she wasn't just like a Dolly Bird sort of character, was she? She had all her faculties, and he liked the idea. She was a bit of a Maggie Thatcher kind of.
She was a bit, yeah.
And he loved this, and he there's some so great scenes of her taking charge and whipping the Rovers into shape, and Fred's just there melting, so doughy-eyed at this woman was a friend of his for a long time, but he kind of.
Admirer.
He's a proper admirer of her, and she takes advantage of this by saying, "Oh, can I swap bedrooms? I want to have the bedroom that's at the one side of the street." I don't remember, but I think when he
runs rampant.
Yeah, when he gets a bit too close to her and everything goes wrong, and she ends up barring half the street from the pub. She's gone.
Great.
She's gone. Fantastic little guest role there.
And he has a test of his managerial abilities when Shelley and Gina become bickering barmaids. They both want to be the pub manager, and he has to try to mediate, eventually selecting Shelley for the job.
2003 was when he more of a supporting role to Ashley. This was a father year really, and by golly did he need it, because before the end of the first month of 2003, sadly Maxine Peacock was no more, met a very sticky and bloody end at the hand of serial killer Richard Hillman. And Fred's just there as a supportive role through his death and her death. Sorry, and it's very, very sweet stuff. But sad. There's also another proposal at the beginning of the year. Before this, he and Doreen get drunk together, and he proposes to her. That was again another little beginning of the year silly storyline. But it's interesting. I found when after Maxine died, Ashley finds out that Joshua, their son, might not be his baby. It actually was fathered by the Dr. Matt, or could have been fathered by the Dr. Matt Ramsden. And when DNA tests prove that he is the dad, Fred really struggles to come to terms with it. He's like, I don't want anything to do with this baby. It really hits him hard.
That was interesting. I like it when Coronation Street takes a beloved character and gives them a point of view or perspective that would normally make them quite unpopular, because it really does challenge the audience to try to think outside a kind of very narrow view of what's an acceptable thing to do.
Yeah, I suppose Fred was kind of thinking that he'd also been tricked by Matt and Maxine, and he's been given so much love into this baby that...
I'm just going to say, I don't think this is an unusual reaction. I just think that in fiction we like sometimes our heroes to only show the best of themselves. And so when a character that is a popular character has an unpopular opinion about something, it's more interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that he's right. Of course, no way. He's not right here at all. But he's certainly being quite honest in his initial response.
Realistic initial response. But luckily he came around to the idea.
Yes, I mean, it wouldn't have worked if he'd never accepted him.
No.
It would have been a horrible story. But because he went through this journey to come to terms with what had happened, it was much more impactful.
There's more stuff as the year goes on, as Ashley gets Claire as a nanny.
Claire.
Fred's not... He's not too keen on her at first, but especially when she's a bit of a drip, and Fred realises that she might be a bit sweet on Ashley as well.
I mean, what a catch he is.
Little bit too soon after Maxine's death, Fred thinks, but he ends up growing to accept her as the year goes on.
He can't talk. He was after Audrey not long after Alf hit the floor.
True. There's also a funny story that lasts all of about 2 episodes this year, where he ends up courting this woman called Petula Peach, who's the abattoir owner or the widow of an abattoir owner. I can't remember, and he thinks, well, this is good business if I merge with the Peach dynasty.
He really was lost on the modern era. He should have been around in medieval times.
I know. He was out of time, wasn't he?
Pledging his house. Ashley would have been married off to about 500 foreign princesses. But
now, the funny thing about Petula Peach is that she was literally a caricature character of Fred Elliott. She was large, she was booming,
I remember
she
her.
repeated herself. She was in about 2 episodes. And there are some characters that, because they had do you remember Victor Pendlebury's wife, Yvonne, who was basically a rip-off of Mavis, and Mavis gets really annoyed by this woman because she sees the qualities that she's blind to the fact that she also demonstrates them, and this was the same as Fred. So he ends up going out with this Petula Peach and goes back and is like, this woman, she repeats herself all the time. I say she repeats herself all the time. Oh, I can't. And Ashley and Claire just give each other looks, but that was a clever idea for a couple of episodes. At the end of the year, there's another people getting sick eating Fred's pies story. They reach to that well again. And it turns out that they've just been drinking dregs from the bottom of the beer barrel, which is actually what caused the dicky tummy. So it's not Fred after all. And Fred puts on, as part of the story, he puts on this big show. I said earlier that he was a bit of a showman, and he's like, no, there's nothing wrong with Fred Elliott's pies. In fact, I'm gonna give one to baby Joshua. And Claire's like, no, as his nanny, I'm responsible for him, and I'm not gonna have him have one of your pies. So that's a bit of embarrassing for Fred. But as I say, it turns out to be all right. And he's also involved. He was everywhere, Fred, wasn't he?
Yes.
Considering, he was, getting on in his years. He was in his 60s. They just threw episodes.
60s aren't that far
off. No, I know. But if you look now at how much screen time characters of a similar age get in Coronation Street.
Well, again, that's the cast size.
Yeah, for sure.
Partly.
But
anyway,
he was still going really strong. He ends up going to Blackpool, and he's involved in Jim's escape from prison storyline, and he's there with Bet. This is Bet's final appearance on Coronation Street, and it was good that they managed to get scenes together, because you had these 2 larger-than-life characters getting to know each other in Blackpool, which was a lot of fun. Anyway, that was the end of 2003. On to 2004. So if you've been watching ITV3 Coronation Street, you'll recognise some of these stories. Well, this is where we are now.
This is him falling out with Mike, and he's trying to get in with
Penny
Orchid
King.
and Penny King.
Yeah, the Penny King story comes first, and then Orchid's almost a bit of a rebound after that, which is maybe explains why he wasn't thinking so clearly when she turned up.
This is a big blank slate for me, Michael.
No, well, I can take over this one if you want, because I've been reading it recently. I've been watching it recently.
I don't know who is Penny King.
Penny King is the wife of Preston King, who's King of King's Robes, another fabric supplier or clothing manufacturer, I think they were. Sorry.
Not Preston of Preston's Petals.
No, a different one. So Preston, I think the previous year had died of a heart attack after only a couple of episode appearances, and then you got her, his very sophisticated and well off and used to living the high life Penny. She was a really nice woman, actually, on the whole, the widow. And Fred fancies his chances with her. He's at the same time he's also playing Cupid to Ashley and Claire, so there's lots of romance stuff going on here. Now, unbeknownst to Fred, Penny is actually having secret dates with Mike. That's right, Fred's mate Mike is wooing her as well. And when Mike can't commit to Penny, Penny's like, well, fine, I'm going to invite Fred out for a drink. And then this kind of gives Fred ideas that maybe things are progressing more smoothly than they actually are. They could go on holiday together, and of course, before long, Fred has proposed to her, and Penny's like, just need a bit of time to think about that. And I was watching this recently, and it seemed like weeks she was dangling on a thread, not saying whether she would marry him or not. And poor Fred, he's tying himself in knots, thinking, what could be the reason? And he's kind of badgering her, and Ashley's saying, let her be. And...
There's only so many times you can present your heart to be stamped upon before you start to wonder if it's your own fault.
Oh my gosh, the number of footmarks on Fred's heart, honestly. So he's waiting patiently, not knowing that Penny has told Mike that she hasn't got the heart to turn Fred down. Days turn into weeks. Fred gets more and more insecure about the whole deal. He's kind of snapping at Shelley in the pub. One day, though, Ashley spies Penny coming out of Mike's house, and he tells Claire, who informs Fred, and when Fred confronts Penny, she's like, no, there's nothing going on. Nothing going on here.
When Penny and Fred confront...
It's very complicated. It's very complicated. Claire eventually tells Penny, look, just let Fred down. Say you're going out with Mike. It's going to be all right. And Penny instead just tells him, I can't marry you. It's too soon after Preston. So yet another proposal from Fred.
Down the path.
Dashed. Yeah. Audrey eventually finds out about Mike and Penny and breaks the news to Fred that they're actually going out together, and he's gutted by this, fuming about Mike's betrayal. But he doesn't have to stay in the doldrums for that story for long, because soon after he meets a chap called Dennis Stokes. There's this guy that they meet at the golf course, and he's got a Thai bride. And this story, like, I don't know whether they could do this these days. It was ever so slightly racist, I'm going to say.
Well, again, I'm going to say 2004, you can say we should have all known better. But I don't know specifically when I became conscious of this as a thing, but I'm certainly going to say that around this time, the idea of mail order brides and stuff entered into the public consciousness.
Yeah, especially with the rapid rise of the internet at this time as well, and people getting broadband around here. So he meets this guy and his Thai bride on the golf course, and Dennis is like, well, the Thai women are brilliant, and they do everything for you, they've got a lot of love, and they're a bit desperate.
I just need to say, no one's going to cover themselves in glory in this storyline. Just prepare yourself for this, please.
No, not at all. But it's one that I kind of look back on and think, oh, that was kind of funny.
It was of its time.
Yeah.
The joke was, to defend Coronation Street here, the joke was on Fred, who was trying to take advantage of a desperate woman who wanted to better her life.
Well, that's what he thought, but in the reality,
exactly,
Dennis is palming him off on a woman called Stacey, who works down the market but goes under the pseudonym of Orchid to try and basically con Fred out of a whole load of money. I'd forgotten a lot of the details of this. I think this is what was on when I was living in France, so I didn't see it properly at the time. But there was a great scene where he takes her to the Rovers, and she ends up getting talked to by Kirk and a few of the others, and Kirk thinks that her name. She said, we've been talking to our kid," and I think that Orchid is our kid.
Silly.
Hello, better delivered by Andy Wyman. Anyway. Ashley is convinced that Orchid's only after Fred's money because he's, whining and dining and giving all these expensive gifts. He thinks that finally he's found somebody who will just accept him for what he is, and somebody he can lavish his attention and all his copious riches on.
Because he thinks she's a blank slate because she's from Thailand.
Yeah, exactly.
Therefore, she doesn't have a personality
But she really played up the, oh, Fred, I do anything for you.
No, let's not.
And so then tragedy strikes what he thinks when she reveals that she's got a sick relative back in Thailand and she has to go and visit him. So obviously the scam is that Fred would initially pay for her to come over to the UK, and then she would find a reason for him to pay for her to go back. But he's able to convince her by throwing more money at her to stay, and so she just ends up staying with him for probably not more than a couple of more episodes. I don't think it was, but Ashley's suspicions get raised to pretty high levels, and Ashley's really rude to Orchid, and she ends up taking advantage of this, sort of going, oh, why is he so mean to me? Fred gets a massive necklace for her to try and placate her, exactly. But anyway, eventually Ashley finds out that Orchid Stacy is working on the market. He tricks Fred into going to the market one day, and once more we get to see some brilliant dramatic acting from Fred as his face falls to see that this woman who he thought was one thing is actually just scamming him.
I mean, don't want to be mean to Fred, but he thought he was taking advantage of somebody, and it turned out they were taking advantage of him, so can't feel
I don't think
sad.
he thought he was taking advantage of her.
Michael, the men who want to buy a bride, I have no sympathy for, because they want somebody who is just a bangmaid, don't they? They just want sex and washing up, cooking and cleaning.
I don't think he got much sex from Orchid.
No, good for her.
Well, she pretends that she's got somewhere else to stay in the city, and she's always really tired and jet lagged in the evening, which is why she has to go away. He just wanted somebody who he could give love and attention to, who would be really, really grateful for it.
Get a dog.
He has a fairly quiet autumn that year. There's a story where he frightens some squirrels out of the loft of number 4 with a football rattle, and they go next door to the Harrises, and then they go through the Platts, and Martin has to pay £165 fee to get rid of them.
And this is why we don't need Adam to get run over by a car every episode to up the drama.
Exactly. This was high drama back in 2004. Yeah. And of course, Fred ends up having to foot the bill because it ends up falling flat on his face. And speaking of money issues, Fred has quite large ones in November that year when he gets into a game of poker with some of the guys that turns into a bit of a grudge match between him and Mike. Things still aren't, running smoothly between the two of them over the whole Penny King fiasco earlier on in the year. Sadly for Fred, he ends up losing his money, his car, and the butcher's shop in the game. But luckily, Mike says, look, I didn't want your stuff. I just want us to be friends again. So let's call it quits. Let's be friends. And wasn't that lovely? And the year ends very nicely for Fred when he's the best man at Ashley and Claire's wedding. Sweet.
2005, Audrey.
Yeah, she has a well. There's a well story with Audrey. 2005 is known by some Corrie fans as being a bit of a not so good year, particularly the summer. Coronation Street sold the summer of 2005 as, I can't remember whether it was like the summer of love, the summer of comedy, but I think in lots of Corrie fans' eyes it was the summer of farce, and as we see when we get down to what this well story was, it stands out from most of the others as being a bit odd.
And we've also got Shelley, who is in dire straits.
Yeah, with Charlie Stubbs.
The boxing, and he starts to court Bev, who is Shelley's mum. He's lonely at the beginning of 2005. Ashley and Claire are away on honeymoon, and Audrey agrees to stay over at number 4, which gets everybody's tongues wagging. And he goes to Audrey's garden and he falls down a big hole. Yeah,
he's bringing her a statue. I can't remember where he got this statue from, but he brings it over to Grasmere Drive. The ground opens up beneath him.
Sinkhole!
It is a sinkhole in Grasmere Drive, exactly.
There's precedent.
Yeah,
Weatherfield just built over a series of, medieval tunnels or something. He has to be winched out by the fire brigade.
Mm-hmm.
Ken and Roy are talking about this historical possibility that it's St. Weatherswell.
Yeah.
Obviously Weatherfield, named after St. Weather. It's a source of water with natural healing properties.
Yeah, it's like this mystical druid, not just, what's it called?
Whatever.
Spiritual,
yeah,
Celtic.
Bernie would be all over this.
Bernie would love this. Yeah, it's like the Fountain of Youth in Grasmere Drive.
Let's throw Paul down there. Let's see what happens. Right, so Fred muses over the idea of selling this water.
Always one to take up a business opportunity.
He sells the Rovers to Shelley and he throws himself into this idea. This is like they did this in Only Fools and Horses with the Peckham spring water. Yeah.
This just seems like such a silly story. I barely remember it.
So Audrey has been advised by Mike to not bring him in on the deal, and he gets his nose put out of joint. Then he eventually agrees to a 70-30 split, but it turns out it's not even a mythical healing well, it's sewage water. And so he pulls out selling the pub to Shelley.
And he's been drinking this, thinking that it's giving him eternal youth, but it ends up with just Fred having dashes to the toilet.
I mean, it's not that long after this he dies, is it?
No, it's not.
I mean, does it?
Is there a link there?
Is it possible that he shouldn't just drink?
Yeah, he hastened his own demise, perhaps.
This is not a country in which you need to drink water you found on the floor. Right, so Fred discovers that Eddie Maddock, a rival butcher, has been slandering him. He's put a photo of Fred in the shop saying he's got poor quality meat. And
Can you just tell the stories take a really weird turn in 2005?
It's baffling, isn't it?
This one's better remembered.
Yeah,
I think if people
so.
say, "Oh, what's a funny Fred?" The boxing
Fred
matches.
and Ashley.
Yeah, well, it's partly because the Maddocks were also created as rip-offs or caricatures of Fred and Ashley. So you got Maddox, he's proper tough guy, but he's also bold as you like, and then you got
his son,
the son who has got a very Marvin. Squeaky voice, right. Marvin. Yeah,
it turns out Maddox's been bribing the farmer to get the best meat. I'm going to say what's actually happened here is he's paying more for better quality, but I guess bribing for best, that's what we do when we go to Marks and Spencer's. We bribe them to give us better quality food. Fred wants to have it out with him, and Maddox says, why don't we have a boxing match? And then Fred says, okay, how about Ashley versus Marvin, your son? Fred becomes Ashley's manager. He just starts training him.
There's like scenes where Ashley's boxing. There's a side of beef hanging from the ceiling in the back.
I do remember bits
silly.
of this. The match ends with the audience fighting one another, and Ashley and Marvin calling it a draw.
I'm not going to badmouth this story at all. It was utterly silly, but it was entertaining.
Then we get a bit more serious because you've got Shelley and Charlie. He's abusing her. He's keeping her in a room. He's destroying her confidence. And Fred is worried about her. And this goes on for months. And eventually, Bev is trying to defend her. And Fred offers to give Shelley away at the wedding to Charlie. And this is when she jilts Charlie and he supports her.
Fred, there were times when he was a bit of a obnoxious boss, but when
he's sort of a kind of father figure, not really, but he was
in a way, wasn't he? And I think that's what kind of helped him get together with Bev in the end. Yeah,
they get closer. She goes to the Weatherfield Traders Association dance with him, and they kiss. 2006, Fred's final year on the show and this earth ends in a nicer way. I think if I don't know who I would put Fred with as the ultimate girlfriend who I would have wanted him to end up with, because maybe that's a Patreon episode.
Bev to me just felt like somebody who was there. They got on. They didn't get on at the beginning, and it was quite convenient that the two of them were together. And I really, really enjoyed their proposal scene, which happens relatively early on in the year. But I think it's always Audrey for me.
It's always Audrey.
Fred and Bev, they both kind of don't realise that they have got feelings for each other, or the other has got feelings for them at the beginning of the year. And when Bev goes off on a cruise, Fred decides against accompanying her. And then when Liz comes back from the cruise, because she went off with Bev as well, it turns out that Bev found another man there. So little bit of heartbreak and upset for Fred. But it all turns a bit more serious when he bumps into Orchid again later that year. I'd forgotten that she made a comeback. She's still conning men with this Thai bride scam, but the recent man that she's been trying to convince this has been scamming, is beating her up. So Fred persuades Rita to let Orchid stay with her for a bit, but when the man ransacks Rita's flat and is taken away by the police, Fred says, well, you can arrest this Stacey as well because she's a wrong one. And it felt like bizarre closure in this story, didn't it? Like, this was completely unnecessary.
It's like, well, maybe he's a criminal, but she's played with men's hearts, and that's worse in a way.
I suppose it's because at the end of the first round of this story, she just bogs off to like Ibiza or Mauritius or something, and Coronation Street. I wonder if the people are saying, but But why? She got away with it, and she trod on Fred's heart. And this is them saying, well, can't evade the law in Weatherfield. Just hope justice is going to come and get you in the end, even if it's in a bizarre side story 2 years later. But anyway, if you've been enjoying Orchid recently on Classic Coronation Street... Spoiler, yeah, she comes back again. You get to see her one more time. So Fred finds out in March that Bev has been left abandoned by the roadside by this bloke.
Mean?
She's been seeing this other bloke that she met on the cruise ship.
Literally left on the side of the road.
Yeah, so he comes to help her and they have a lovely proposal scene and it's very, very nice and the camera pans above them and it's lovely and romantic.
Well, I won't ask for more details because we'll let everyone discover that for themselves.
Shelley's a bit peeved to find out that Fred intends to make Bev the landlady of the Rovers, though. Looking after the peacock's baby later on in the year makes Fred realise... New baby.
What's his name?
Well, it ends up being Freddie. Who's named after Fred, so I think at
Joshua
this point...
and Freddie.
Yeah.
It's probably just called
Fred realises
Bob or something.
that he wants to retire and move away to the Peak District with Shelley because she's out of the show now. So he sells up the pub to Steve. Audrey,
Hang on,
though...
Fred wants to go to the Peak District with Shelley.
Well, Bev and Shelley. So he's like,
Bev does.
Fred and Bev decide, let's get out of here. Fred realises he's getting old. Shelley's already moved to the Peak District.
I see.
Let's go and stay with her. Audrey's like, hang on a minute. Is Bev the next money gold digger? I mean, she's quite rich, really, isn't it? Audrey who spent many a year
her whole life a gold
sponging
digger.
off of Elf. Yeah, but never mind.
Almost every woman on Coronation Street, sadly, has only got whatever it is she's got because she's slept with a guy who happened to die owning a business.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that's the most uncommon thing. It's true. After going with Fred on a trip to buy a wedding present for Bev, Audrey admits that she still has feelings for him. And Fred's like, I don't know what to do. You're my first love when I joined Coronation Street all those years ago. And I'm torn between two women. What shall I do? And it's a bit of a sad end for Fred. It's very bittersweet.
He's getting married to Bev.
Yeah.
But he still loves Audrey.
He can't decide what to do. Well, he does in the end. He goes to see Audrey on the wedding day before going to the church to marry Bev. Ends up collapsing, dying of a massive stroke in the hallway of Grasmere Drive on the way out. And that's the end of Fred. He just disappears and collapses with a thud, doesn't he? It's really, really tragic because he and Audrey are pouring their hearts out to each other on Audrey's sofa. He goes into the hall, there's a collapse, and he's there dead with his eyes open. It's really like, ooh.
But he's basically told Audrey, you be happy without me, isn't he?
Yeah, his final lines were, be happy. I said, be happy.
I've picked Bev. I hope that you're okay with that.
Yeah.
Basically. But Bev can't believe this, can she?
No, she thinks that they've been having a secret affair. It causes a whole lot of eruption when it comes out.
Well, there's the funeral to deal with.
Yeah, but Bev's there causing a fuss, calling herself Fred's widow. Ashley blames Bev because Bev had been pushing for a quick wedding and retirement. And anyway, it basically ends in a massive fallout between Audrey, Bev, Ashley and everyone. And we get a resolution to it in 2015, don't we? 9 years later, after Deirdre dies, Bev comes back and they have a bit of a make-up chat, which was nice. But anyway,
I mean, Bev was angry with Audrey for a long time about this. I don't think it's fair because Fred went there to tell Audrey, I'm moving on.
It's the fact that he went there on his wedding day that's probably stuck in her core a bit.
I'm going to say that Bev probably should be grateful that he didn't die at the altar because I think that might have happened.
Could have done, actually, couldn't it? Yeah, if he'd have been on time to the wedding and that clock was counting down,
the excitement
could have popped his clogs at the front.
Of telling Audrey it's over versus the excitement of marrying Bev. Similar effect on your heart. Would it have killed you the same? Was he always destined to die at this time? We will never know.
Yeah. I thought it was sweet that he went in a romance story when he was one of Corrie's great romantics.
Yeah, I mean, she got him in the end, didn't she, Audrey?
Yeah, she did.
She's a man killer.
So that was it for Fred
I say
Elliott.
Audrey had to die for.
So Yeah, John Svident ended up quitting Coronation Street. He wasn't. They would have never axed Fred. I mean, I'm sure that if he hadn't decided to leave himself, they would have kept him on as long as they could. He was so popular and such an asset to the programme. Yeah, but in Christmas 2005, Christmas Eve 2005, in fact, there was a rumour in the Mirror newspaper that he was planning on quitting. According to a source, John is telling everyone he's becoming rather fed up. People think John's just like Fred in real life, but they couldn't be more wrong. He's a classical actor, and he says he's missing the stage and theatre terribly. The viewers love him, but the way he's talking, 2006 could well be his last year with the soap.
That's really interesting, because if you look at what Corrie has historically done with the actors on the show, they've kept them under a bit of a tight rein, haven't they? And more recently, we've seen people like Jodie Prenger and Maureen Lipman pursuing careers on the stage as well as acting in Coronation Street, probably because the cast is so big. They can afford to let them leave for a while. And you've seen, people bow out for stuff like Dancing on Ice or Big Brother, for example.
How timely.
Who's to say that if they had done this with John, he might have decided to stay in the show longer. If they said, yeah, take us somewhere out, go tread the boards, go indulge in your, in your wishes to be on the stage again.
Yeah, I think I've got various quotes from him as the years go on. He kind of opens up a little bit more about his reasons behind leaving, and one of them he's talking about he wishes that they had been able to give him a bit of wiggle room, because maybe he would have stayed. But he was also it wasn't just that he couldn't get out onto the stage, but he didn't think the show was as top draw as it once was. There was I can't remember when he was. I think this was fairly soon after he left. To be honest, he was talking about it to some publication and said, the show's just not what it once was. The quality goes down. The production values go down. People talk now about the quality of Coronation Street, and it's not what it once was, and the production quality isn't. John Svident was saying the same thing back in 2006.
I know, but this I do agree with a lot of this, but it also reminds me of, if you go back in time, almost every generation says, "Oh, the youth of today, they should know it's not as good as it." I think we do need to value what we have now, because it could go. But it's interesting that John Svident was saying this. He was saying we've got superb technicians and lighting men. They've lit some of the most wonderful programmes that Granada ever did, and the lighting isn't all that good on Coronation Street. It's because they haven't got the time to do it. And just in the past couple of months, we've had listeners speaking to us about saying we don't think the lighting's that great on Coronation Street anymore. Yeah, John was saying this 20 years ago. He says there's no rehearsals anymore. People talk now about if they say, Corrie's not as good as it once was, bring back rehearsals. But it's been, 20 plus years since they've had regular rehearsals on Coronation Street. This quote that he's saying, 2006, it could have been somebody these days. He says they go through story like nobody's business. The company... He said the writers have got to churn out stuff.
Yeah, the writers are churning out stories like nobody's business. The company, they're in a bit of trouble financially, as we all know. This is talking about ITV. They pull back on the production costs instead of putting more money in and making it better, instead of losing an episode and making it higher quality programme. I'm not criticising Coronation Street. What I am criticising is what they're doing to it.
Yeah.
It sounds like it comes straight out of 2023. The production values, too many episodes,
rushing everything.
No rehearsals,
taking money out of it. I mean, I think that it's fair to say that you could spend more money on Coronation Street and make it better, couldn't you? You could do that with anything.
Yeah. In 2008, he was interviewed about the show, and he said the reason he left because he wanted to spend more time with his wife, his children, his grandchildren. And this is when he said, look, I thought that they might find some way to accommodate me. He wanted to do the theatre, but he was missing his family terribly. They didn't live up north. They lived, I think it was London, I can't remember. But he went, he didn't see his grandchildren growing up for part of it, and he wanted to have the chance to do it. He said, quite honestly, I was surprised and disappointed that they didn't try a bit harder. I told them a year in advance that I was going, and then they took me out to dinner and said, we're not going to insult you, John, by trying to make you stay. And I'm sitting there thinking, please go on, insult me. It sounds like he would have stayed. If only they'd...
But can we say maybe...
Fred Elliott, don't let him go.
Can we say maybe it looks like they've learned their lesson?
Yes.
I really do think that looking at what happened with John Svident and seeing what happens with current Corrie cast, I think they have learned their lesson. Because Maureen Littman, she can go do what she wants and she come back and be Evelyn. Ben Price took a year out, didn't he, to spend more time with his family. He came back. They didn't kill him off. They killed off Fred Elliott.
Yeah.
I don't know why they decided to kill Fred Elliott off. It makes a very neat story.
And it's, the tragic romance is, tale as old as time.
From a storytelling perspective, I think probably the right choice. But from, a pastoral and kind of caring for your cast perspective, it would have been better to have given him a door to come back into. And, we say a lot about Ian McLeod and there's loads of criticism levelled at him, but I think he is very good at maintaining those relationships with his cast and making sure that they're taken care of when they need to be. And one of the things that was listed was in the job listing for the executive producer role that he has now taken, which obviously he had to apply for, was a very strong focus on the mental health of the cast and your your principals and the talent, and I think he's proven to ITV that he cares about that, and I'm hoping, who knows what stories will come out in the future, but I'm hoping that this focus makes it better for those people, because Coronation Street is littered with sad tales of people that were big names on Corrie who have had very tragic ends because of mental health issues, and who knows how much the fame and the pressure of being on the show has caused those problems.
I think the last time that John was on TV was 2011 when he did a guest spot on Holby City, and he was interviewed around that time as well. Of course, his exit's going to be brought up in any kind of interview like that. What was interesting, I thought, from that one was he said, I wanted to go quietly, and I suggested that Ashley discovers Fred dead in bed on the wedding morning. Do you think that would have worked better?
No.
Or I think Corrie made the right decision to have him go the way he did, just for that final extra tragic scene at Audrey's house.
Well, he also talks, John Svident, about his health issues. He was going to have heart surgery, and perhaps that also, I mean, the more distance you have from a situation, sometimes the more honest you can be about it, or perhaps sometimes you kind of change history a little bit. But he's saying now in 2011 that his health issues
was a reason.
And again, the producers were like, "Well, go then."
He was also speaking quite candidly about some of the younger cast members of Coronation Street. Nobody was named particularly, but he said...
So this is 2011.
This is 2011
so bear
as well,
in mind when this was. This is... When did we start our show?
It would be 2012, so this was just
right, so the year before we started, he's talking about some of the young people.
He said, some of the young people just want to be on screen and have no ambition to act elsewhere. What future do they have when their contract ends? One of them asked who this Laurence Olivier was I was talking about, as he's never heard of him. That must have cut him deep. He was his idol when he was growing up.
Honestly, though, I mean, you can tell the people that take the craft seriously on the show, I think. And I'm not going to say anything, but there are certainly some people that feel as though they wanted to be famous and just became an actor.
It was interesting where he's saying that, they've got no ambition to act elsewhere. But I think it's fair enough if you do end up on Coronation Street and you decide you want to stay. It's great if you want to go on to something else, but the whole, soap does rely on certain characters staying there for the long haul.
Look at William Roach.
Yeah, if he had ambition to act elsewhere, that would have been a completely different story.
William Roach went in as a young man. He'd been in the military before he started. He'd done other things very briefly. But he was young when he started Coronation Street. And he's been in it his almost entire career. So I wouldn't say he's unambitious.
No, I mean, John Svident preferred to do bit parts here, there and everywhere so that he could, I guess, in his eyes, be more fully rounded as an actor and have all these different experiences. But it's not for everybody.
I can see his point. You know, I think you gain experience and other perspectives, and that richness that you bring to your craft, it probably makes your performances better. But that's why I think that it's probably good that Corrie, hopefully, is now letting actors go off and do other things.
Yeah.
I mean, I keep saying this as though I know this is what they're doing. All I know is what I've seen, and I've seen people going off and doing other things. And I think actually that's probably a really good idea.
Yeah. John just really, really cared about the acting profession, and one of the funny quotes that I read was, I took Sir Ian McKellen to task once by asking how he could play a role in Corrie. So this was him playing Lionel Hipkiss or Mel Hutch, right?
Yeah.
Which meant some poor actor who needed the work lost out. He didn't reply, just hung his head.
No, this is interesting because I've always argued that it lends some credibility to Coronation Street to have these big names on the show.
Yeah, but it sounds like John hated it.
But also knowing full well that also kind of undermines, without me wanting it to, the talent of Coronation Street actors themselves, because, you know, they should have credibility enough that they don't need Sir Ian McKellen turning up to hold a book club. But I do think it adds, you can argue either way, can't you? I don't think anyone could have played Lionel Hipkiss the way that Sir Ian McKellen did.
No, but I do love the idea that a thesp as big as him hang his head in shame after something that John Svident said to him. I suppose they were mates from their theatre days when they did that play that I can't pronounce in the 80s.
Patrick Stewart had the wherewithal to have done it before he became famous.
I know. So, after Coronation Street, there was, it was things. It's not that they didn't dry up. That's not the right word. He took it slower after Coronation Street. He had a couple of other short acting stints.
True to his goals in life, didn't he?
Yeah.
You know, he wanted to spend more time with his family, and he
had
did. Health issues.
He was in Holby, like I said earlier. Oh, that was 2012. That was his last telly role, according to IMDb. He was in something called Above Suspicion in 2009. He narrated The Midsummer Night's Dream at the Bridgewater Hall in 2011. But really, Corrie was his last big role. And I hope that he had a lovely retirement with his family. That's kind of it really for Fred. Such a brilliant character. We've been speaking for over 2 hours about him now. I know a lot of it was recounting. When we do these character profiles, I hope people enjoy just hearing the story in full, which you can't just go onto Corriepedia and read. I did get a lot of this from Corriepedia, but I had to cobble lots of it together from different places. This is the ultimate guide to everything of importance that Fred done, and it was nice to be able to remember and talk about some of our favourite bits.
Well, it's also a good job that Corriepedia exists, because you went through it, didn't you? Did you go through every episode he was in?
No, just for some of the years that I did.
But what a great resource Corriepedia is. If you want more information about almost anything on Coronation Street, that's where to go.
Yeah, indeed. But anyway, Fred Elliott, he's going to be remembered so fondly. He was larger than life, a great character, so layered. It's really terrible, I think, that as far as I can tell, John only won one award for the portrayal of Fred, which was the British Soap Award in 1999. He got Best Comedy Performance. He was so much more than that, but I posthumously award him
icon.
Corrie modern status. Corrie icon. He so is in a show where so many of the iconic characters are women and characters from 80s and before. Fred Elliott to me really does stand out as somebody that everybody knows and so many people love, have got so much affection for. He's just fantastic, and you could tell this from the outpouring of grief when he passed away the other week. 86 he died. Coronation Street statement said, "Everyone at Coronation Street is deeply saddened to learn of John Savident's death. As Fred Elliott, John firmly established himself in the pantheon of Coronation Street greats. His peerless comic timing, combined with a deep pathos arising from his outstanding dramatic skill, made Fred an unforgettable, iconic character that provided great joy to viewers for many years." And they even dedicated last Monday's episode to him, didn't they? We got a little picture of him at the end. That kind of sums it up pretty nicely, actually, Coronation Street. Maybe we didn't need to be talking about him for the last 2.25 hours, but never mind. I've enjoyed it. And
thank you to Fred.
Yeah, thank you, Fred, for everything. Thank you, John, for bringing him to life. And God, I just can't fathom the fact that had they given that part in 1994 to just some kind of walk-on actor, so we just need somebody for 6 episodes to play a butcher, how different the course of Coronation Street could have been. In it, you can't always strike gold. I always say that like Diggory Compton was an attempt to get a new Fred. I can't remember whether there was any crossover in the characters. This guy who was another large...
Ollie's daddy was a baker.
Yeah, a baker, and he had a bit...
He was a bit like a Fred.
He attempted...
But that's why it didn't work.
It really felt like they were trying to do him again, and Fred Elliott is uncopyable.
But like I said,
you're never going to top that for that kind of character.
Like I said earlier, I think this is the ultimate demonstration of what makes soaps and Coronation Street specifically such a great medium, because it took John Svident and Coronation Street's writers and producers to create this character. They took somebody who could have been a bit part and they turned him into an iconic Coronation Street, a television star.
A bit like David Neilson with Roy, who had a similar timeline, really, didn't he? At least when he started, and he came in and he was a bit of a weirdo.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they were intending to make him a long-term character, let alone the icon that he is now.
But I think the same thing happened with Sally Carman and Abby Franklin. She came in. She was a dossy mum who couldn't cook fish fingers to save her life, and she's turned into a really solid character. Yeah. That's what I mean. Coronation Street, it takes these really talented people and together with the actor can create really, really brilliant characters and storylines that change lives. So tribute to both. In this.
Shall we call it a day there? Have we talked enough about Fred?
Yes, maybe we have.
Thank you everybody for listening. I hope you enjoyed that trip down memory lane. I'm sure we've got a lot of Fred lovers out in the audience. I hope we've done him justice with our tribute this evening.
And we also called out for some tributes for you guys to tell us what you thought of Fred.
Oh yeah, we did have a few.
We'll be putting those at the end of the next episode, the main episode on Friday.
Oh yeah.
So if you've got anything to add or anything has joggled your memory banks, please do feel free to email us conversationstreet@gmail.com, or maybe send us a tweet or something, and to share your thoughts and memories of him, and we will put those all together in the episode on Saturday that you'll listen to. Okay. Right.
Thank you. Time to go. Let's. There's time for dinner. We got a nice Fred Elliott's meat pie for dinner, or a nice blood sausage.
We've got a garlic sausage actually.
Oh, garlic sausage.
It needs eating up.
That sounds a bit foreign for Fred, but I don't know.
Well, I don't know. He might appreciate the craft.
I'll raise my sausage to Fred this evening.
Oh my
in God. Tribute.
That's all he wanted out of life, to raise his sausage in goodwill and hearty hail to all mankind.
Indeed. Right. Good night, everybody.